My name is Sally, and I'm a 50-year-old housewife. Both of my children are now adults and have moved out to live on their own. Since they've become independent, I've started working from home in addition to my housewife duties. My husband supports my decision to work from home. At first, I only made about $200 a month, but over time, my income grew to $600 and then $800. I'm thankful for the clients who give me work. My sister-in-law, who is my husband's twin sister, lives nearby. We are the same age, and I have always had a complicated relationship with her. Although we became somewhat close, I have always disliked her, and even talking to her can be annoying. My husband feels the same way about her. My sister-in-law is arrogant and likes to look down on others. She often shows off, which can be quite irritating. She has a son named Tommy, my nephew, who is 24 years old. Tommy has been very sick since he was a child and can hardly move, so he has always stayed in bed. One day, my sister-in-law sent me a mean text. She said she was going to Hawaii for a week, staying in a fancy hotel, and bragged about wearing a swimsuit on the beach. She mocked my appearance and suggested that I'm unattractive because I have 2 kids. She called me a fat old woman and said that she looks great for her age. While I do have a matronly figure and my body has changed after having children, I think my sister-in-law isn't as perfect as she believes. I wondered what she would do with Tommy while she was away. I knew she wouldn't arrange proper care for him. She just left him at home with drinks and snacks by his bed. I thought it was terrible how she treated him, saying I don't have to listen to her since she has no idea what hardship is like. I've had a tough time because of Tommy's condition. I even thought I shouldn't have had him. Then, I told her I would take care of Tommy and left to get him. It's only a 5-minute drive to her house, and I took my station wagon because it has space for a wheelchair. I took Tommy in because I felt sorry for him. He was just lying around at home, and I thought it was sad. My sister-in-law made a rude comment, saying I was a housewife who did nothing, and that I was perfect for taking care of Tommy. She said my remote work wasn't a real job and that both she and her husband had full-time jobs. She thought I deserved to spend my life taking care of Tommy. I replied, "Is that so? Let's go, Tommy." Tommy looked sad, and I understood why. His mother treated him poorly. Taking care of a sick child is hard, but it was cruel of her to say those things in front of him. Even if he's an adult, it hurts to hear that kind of talk. Eventually, I brought Tommy to my house. When my husband David came home, he was surprised to see Tommy. "Why is he here?" he asked. I explained that my sister was going on vacation and planned to leave Tommy behind, so I brought him home without asking David first. David was understanding. "Your sister must have lost her mind. Leaving him behind is just awful. Tommy, you're welcome to stay here. We'll take good care of you." Tommy smiled and thanked us. Despite my dislike for my sister-in-law and her husband, I've always liked Tommy. He is kind, empathetic, and very smart. Even though he hasn't been able to go to a special education school, I've always thought of him as a smart kid. After that, I found out that my sister-in-law and her husband really did go to Hawaii, leaving their bedridden son behind. I was shocked. What would they do if something happened to Tommy while they were gone? They wouldn't be able to come back right away. My husband was just as surprised as I was. They must be out of their minds for going to Hawaii and leaving Tommy behind, he said, and I agreed. I know I might not have the right to say this since I've never taken care of Tommy, but it's shocking that my sister-in-law would leave him without any proper care. If I hadn't gotten that message, Tommy would have been left alone without anyone even realizing it, and that gives me chills. It really is terrible. I've never cared for a seriously ill child, and my in-laws are healthy. They've always said that if they couldn't take care of themselves, they would go to a nursing home, so I've never been a caregiver. That's why I didn't feel I could criticize my sister-in-law, but I still can't understand how she could just leave her son behind with only a drink. Tommy has a serious illness, and he qualifies for welfare support. There are also short-term care facilities available if they needed to travel. When my sister-in-law and her family returned from Hawaii, they came to our house just to insult us. "Here's a souvenir for you," she said, holding out seashells. "We picked these up at the beach and have plenty, so we're giving some to you." I didn't want them and told her so. "You're rejecting my kindness?" she said. "What about this driftwood?" I declined again. "By the way, is Tommy doing okay?" she asked, adding, "Not that I care about that useless child." I was shocked. "How can you say that about your own son?" I asked. She replied, "What do you know? It's the worst to have given birth to him only to find out he has a serious illness. I want the money I spent raising him back." I told her she could only say that because she didn't understand my feelings. She snapped back, You don't know what it's like to live with a useless son." Then she asked if we were serious about adopting Tommy. I said, who in their right mind would adopt a child like that? But I was serious. I closed the door, and they left. After that, my husband and I decided to adopt Tommy as our own. It was a big change for him since he had been shocked by being abandoned by his parents. But gradually, he began to smile in our home. He is bedridden but can use his hands, so he enjoys using tablets and smartphones while lying down. One day, Tommy seemed really happy. "Look, my work is going to be published in a literary magazine," he said. I asked him what kind of magazine it was, and he explained that he had been writing novels as a hobby because it was the only thing he could do while bedridden. "It's a little embarrassing," he added. I told him there was nothing to be embarrassed about. It was a great hobby. "Can I see it?" I asked. He showed me the first story he wrote, and I started reading it. It was very well written and really touched me. "This is amazing. I can't believe how good it is," I told him. I struggled to put my feelings into words, so I started writing on my tablet, and surprisingly, people liked it. I then wrote a medium-length story, and that one got published in a magazine too. "I didn't know you had such talent," I told Tommy. I showed his work to my husband, who loves reading, and he was really impressed. "This is amazing. It feels like pure literature," he said. Tommy explained that he admired authors like Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and Dostoevsky. "That's why my stories have a somewhat melancholic feeling," he added. The authors he mentioned do write sorrowful or tragic works. Tommy's novel was published in hardcover under the pseudonym Scott Weill. He chose Scott from F. Scott Fitzgerald and Weill from Hermann Hesse's book, Beneath the Wheel. Soon, Scott Weill's book became a huge success, selling out quickly at bookstores. There was even a special section for his books at our local store, which made me really happy. Then Tommy won the Pulitzer Prize, and we were all shocked. "I won the Pulitzer Prize? That's amazing. You really worked hard for this," I said. Tommy smiled, saying, "Even someone bedridden like me can become a recognized writer. No one should ever give up on their dreams." A press conference was arranged, but we didn't go with him. Tommy needed to be seated in a special wheelchair to keep him safe. I wheeled him into the venue, and I could see he was tense and nervous. When the press conference started, Tommy was in front of a lot of cameras, and the event was broadcast live on TV. "Hello, I'm Scott Weill, a bedridden author. Since childhood, I've suffered from a serious illness and have spent most of my time in bed. However, reading books was my escape, and I decided I wanted to be an author too and inspire others. I'm grateful to everyone who has read my books and to my step-parents who adopted me." After Tommy's speech, journalists started asking questions, some of which were quite insensitive. They asked him why he was adopted. Tommy responded, "My real mother was very troubled because of my illness. She probably grew to dislike me. I can't blame her for it." Then, voices rose from the crowd, saying, "What a terrible parent. That's really low." However, Tommy didn't want anyone to feel sorry for him. He said, "Everyone has their own circumstances, so please don't judge them." After everything ended, my husband and I helped Tommy into our modified car, which made it easy for his wheelchair to get in. When we got home, my sister-in-law and her husband were waiting for us. "Tommy, you won the Pulitzer Prize. I'm so happy. Come live with us again," she suddenly said. Her attitude had changed completely. She probably thought Tommy would make a lot of money now. Tommy replied, "No, I'm going to keep living here. I'm not going back to that house." "But I'm your real mother," she insisted. Tommy responded, "My only parents are Sally and David." "Then give us the prize money," she demanded. "No, this money is for my mom and dad, not you. It's for Sally." "What? I'm the one who raised you all these years. Give it to me." "Not a chance," Tommy shot back. Despite her being financially stable, my sister-in-law was always looking for ways to make money quickly. She was determined to get the $15,000 from the Pulitzer Prize, but Tommy wouldn't budge. "I don't think of you as my parents anymore. Even when I was young, you insulted me. I didn't speak badly about you at the press conference, but you often said you wished you hadn't given birth to me and that you wanted to abandon me because I was worthless. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? I'm the one who's at a loss for having given birth to someone like you. You should be the one apologizing. I did nothing wrong. How dare you forget the favor of raising you?" my sister-in-law yelled. Her husband also demanded the money, and I couldn't believe how greedy they were. It was really shameful and vulgar. They bragged about being full-time employees and said they weren't short on money, but they looked foolish. So, I decided to fight back. You love money so much. You're selling all kinds of things on those online marketplaces, aren't you? You're so desperate to make a profit. Look, you're selling a bunch of seashells. And it seems like you're selling coral too. Do you think that's okay? What? Everyone buys seashells to decorate their homes, she argued. No, that's not right. Taking a few seashells as souvenirs from a beach in Hawaii is fine, but you shouldn't take coral, even if you say it's okay. Both seashells and coral are important to the beach ecosystem, even if the coral is dead. It's not right to take it home. It's even written on Hawaii's official website. If you check the fishing regulations, you'll see it's not allowed, and you could even get fined if it's deemed malicious. What? No way, she exclaimed, shocked. I absolutely refuse, my sister-in-law shouted. Well, since you're selling those things online, it's definitely wrong, so I'm going to report you. We're going inside the house now, bye. No, don't. I'll report you, and you'll definitely get caught. With that, we quickly went into our house. Right away, we contacted the police. Anyone might pick up a few seashells from the beach, but I saw that my sister-in-law was selling a huge amount of seashells and coral online, which made me think she was a poacher or something. She probably thought it was okay to take coral as long as it wasn't alive, but ignorance can be dangerous. I also reported her on the online marketplace. I had just realized the situation yesterday, so I thought it was perfect payback. After that, my sister-in-law got in trouble with the police and ended up paying fines. I hope she understands how serious her actions were and reflects on them. Since then, she has stopped coming to our house. I wonder if she's scared I might do something else. As far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't do anything to her unless she provoked me. I'm just glad she's keeping her distance. I hope it stays this way forever. Meanwhile, I'm taking care of Tommy while working from home, and I'm getting help from a caregiver so I don't have to do everything myself. It's tough to care for him since he's bedridden, but I'm happy to be with him. I want Tommy to keep writing novels without worrying about anything. I hope his books become even more famous around the world. Our kids have also become big fans of Tommy's novels. They'll be coming back home soon, and I hope we can all spend quality time together as a family.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca, your narrator. Today, I'd like to share my story. Like many of you, I've faced my fair share of challenges, particularly with my mother-in-law, Emma. She's the type who loves to take charge and frequently oversteps the boundaries that my husband, Anthony, and I have set. Despite our multiple warnings, we struggle to enforce these boundaries, allowing Emma to exert a considerable influence over our lives for quite some time. It's not that she was outright rude or openly disliked me, but she had her subtle ways of showing her discontent. She didn't hesitate to critique my personal style, and strangely enough, she didn't hold back on her comments about her own son either. The list of things she's done without our approval is extensive, but one particularly striking instance was our wedding. Emma took it upon herself to change everything, from the decorations and flowers to the cake. We managed to stop her from altering the venue, but for everything else, we had to either go along with her choices or incur financial losses. When confronted, her response was always that she believed she knew best and had superior taste. Her expensive preferences did little to mask her lack of respect for our choices, which was both insulting and frustrating. As for Anthony, he found it challenging to stand up to his mother. Cutting off contact was never on his radar. I tried my best to overlook her intrusions, and for a while, things remained stable. That was until Emma found a new way to assert her opinions. After years of saving, Anthony and I finally bought our dream home. It was perfect for us, and I took great care to decorate it in a way that reflected our personalities. However, Emma's reaction was far from pleasant. She criticized our choices and the way we'd styled the place, claiming it looked cheap and tasteless. She insisted we should have consulted her, but we made it clear that our decisions were final, and we loved our home just as it was. Despite her protests and offers to improve our space to her liking, we stood firm. Our home was a reflection of us, not her, and we intended to keep it that way. In sharing this, I hope not only to vent but to connect with others facing similar challenges. It's a reminder that while we can't control how others behave, we can choose how we respond and what we hold dear. I've never appreciated how forcefully Emma insisted we make changes based on her suggestions, but this time, Anthony and I were resolute in keeping her out of our decisions. Despite her relentless texts, calls, and unexpected visits, we held our ground. But Emma wasn't one to back down easily. She devised a more cunning approach to disrupt our peace. To celebrate finally purchasing our home after years of saving, Anthony and I decided to treat ourselves to a short vacation out of state. It had been ages since we'd been able to get away, and with a bit of extra money, it felt like the perfect opportunity. Our home was supposed to be empty during our trip, but a kind gentleman from our neighborhood in his 70s offered to keep an eye on it. He promised to notify us if anything seemed out of the ordinary, though we weren't expecting any trouble. Imagine our surprise when he called to inform us that he saw 4 women entering our house. Alarmed, we pressed for details, and one woman's description unmistakably matched Emma's. Confused and irritated, Anthony and I needed to understand what was happening. I called Emma directly to confront her. "Emma, what are you doing at our house? Our neighbor saw you and some people entering." She replied nonchalantly, "Oh, I'll be staying here for 2 weeks with my friends, just 4 of them. But don't worry, no wild parties or anything. We thought it would be nice to spend some quality time together. Plus, your house could use some looking after. Think of it as us house sitting for you. But we're not even home. Why would you bring your friends over without us there?" I asked, bewildered. "Don't fret, I'll entertain them. And with the recent break-ins around your neighborhood, consider this us keeping your place secure. It's better this way, especially with all the valuables you and Anthony have. We wouldn't want anything to go missing now, would we?" Emma reasoned. While her justification had some merit, her approach was entirely uninvited and invasive. It was yet another instance of her crossing boundaries, disguised as concern for our new home. Her tone during our conversation left me feeling uneasy and suspicious. The casual way she mentioned house sitting felt too convenient, almost as if she had orchestrated this visit well in advance. The fact that she arrived with friends unannounced, knowing we weren't home, raised several red flags for me. It appeared she had used her key to enter our house, and I shuddered to think what could have happened if our neighbor hadn't noticed and informed us right away. I was grateful for his vigilance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my gratitude might be premature, as something unsettling loomed in my thoughts. I shared my concerns with Anthony, expressing how uncomfortable it made me that Emma was bringing strangers into our home. It just didn't sit right, and I struggled to understand her motives. Anthony seemed to take it in stride, believing it was fortunate that someone was looking after our home, which might deter burglaries. But my worries extended beyond the threat of theft. Emma's history of overstepping boundaries was well documented in our experiences with her, and this felt like another glaring example. He tried to reassure me, suggesting we address the issue with Emma once we returned home. He acknowledged that his reluctance to confront his mother had to change, especially given her recent actions. I understood his difficulty, knowing that Emma had raised him alone, but something had to give. I still felt anxious, not entirely reassured by Anthony's resolve. The following day, our neighbor's call only heightened my unease. He asked if we were still on vacation, and I explained Emma and her friends were at our house, supposedly to keep it safe. His next words sent a chill down my spine. He reported hearing a lot of noise coming from our home, not the usual sounds of someone living there, but more akin to renovation work. This unexpected news left Anthony and me speechless, grappling with the implications of Emma's actions in our absence. The situation was becoming increasingly alarming, challenging our initial perceptions and forcing us to confront the unsettling reality awaiting us upon our return. The revelation from our neighbor made everything fall into place. Emma, my mother-in-law, had often expressed her disdain for my decorating skills, deeming them tasteless while insisting she knew better. Her sudden silence regarding our decor after learning about our short getaway now felt ominously significant. Anthony speculated about the nature of the noises, wondering if there might have been a misunderstanding. However, the neighbor's observations of delivery trucks bringing in interior decoration items and the sight of Emma and her friends actively participating in the changes left no room for doubt. It turned out that one of her companions was a known interior decorator, a detail that only deepened our suspicions. The thought of Emma taking it upon herself to overhaul our home's interior without our consent was heart-wrenching. Both Anthony and I were in a state of disbelief and panic, grappling with the reality of her unwelcome intrusions. We expressed our gratitude to the neighbor for his vigilance and clarified that Emma's actions were unauthorized, underscoring the gravity of the situation. Overwhelmed by frustration and the urgent need to intervene, we knew we had to take action. I declared our vacation officially over. I couldn't enjoy another moment under the weight of this betrayal. Anthony shared my distress, apologizing for his mother's unrestrained actions and baffled by her choice to involve friends in this unwarranted project. Faced with no other option to halt Emma's endeavors before more damage was done, I contemplated involving the authorities. However, the thought of calling the police on Emma felt distressing for Anthony. Ultimately, the urgency of the situation outweighed our reservations. With Anthony's reluctant consent, I contacted the police to request a welfare check, citing the ongoing disturbances reported by our neighbor. Although this decisive action felt drastic, it seemed to be the only viable way to protect our home from further unauthorized alterations. When I called the police, I refrained from disclosing my suspicions but mentioned that my mother-in-law and her friends were staying at our house. Given the recent spike in burglaries, the police took my concerns seriously and conducted a welfare check. The feedback from the officers was nothing short of shocking. They reported that our home was in chaos, with ongoing demolition causing dust and damage everywhere. My carefully selected decorations were either mishandled or missing, a clear testament to their disregard for our belongings. Upon returning home, the reality was as bad as the police had described, if not worse. The images they shared revealed the extent of the havoc wreaked during our absence. Overwhelmed by the scene, I experienced an intense emotional breakdown, feeling inconsolable. Anthony, though deeply injured, managed to maintain his composure enough to engage directly with the police. He made it clear that his mother had massively overstepped by undertaking renovations without our permission, resulting in significant damage. The officers on site sympathized with our plight, acknowledging the financial and emotional toll of her unauthorized alterations. Faced with the choice of pressing charges for property destruction, Anthony and I agreed we wanted to hold Emma accountable for her actions. The police were supportive, offering to initiate the legal process on our behalf and promising to provide further documentation of the damage. In the meantime, we arranged for my sister to watch over the house until we could return. Anthony took charge, determined to ensure his mother faced consequences for her recklessness, while I unleashed every curse I could muster in my state of distress. I struggled to find the right words to express my feelings about Emma, but Anthony handled the situation with a level of calm and decisiveness that felt nothing short of heroic. He promptly arranged our return flights, determined to tackle the aftermath of Emma's intrusion as quickly as possible. Our immediate focus shifted to rectifying the chaos she had caused and beginning the arduous process of rebuilding what had been carelessly destroyed. Upon our arrival back in our hometown, we wasted no time and headed straight to the police station to take formal action against Emma's unauthorized renovations. We presented the officers with photographs showcasing our home's original state alongside the devastation she had inflicted. The officers were visibly appalled by the extent of the damage and suggested we pursue legal action for the havoc she had wreaked. My frustration and anger reached a boiling point as I became resolute in ensuring Emma learned a harsh lesson for her actions. Our decision to confront her at the police station where she was being held stemmed from a desire to face her directly and make her understand the gravity of her behavior. When we finally saw Emma, she responded with a feigned innocence and confusion, questioning why she had been incarcerated as if she were unaware of the chaos she had caused. Her lack of remorse, coupled with her insistence that she was merely helping us by imposing her tastes on our home, was infuriating. Anthony, equally incensed, challenged her delusion head-on, confronting her audacity and utter disregard for our wishes and property. Emma's defense dripped with entitlement as she asserted that her intentions were to enhance our home, completely oblivious to the personal and financial turmoil she had created. She even had the audacity to critique my taste, proposing to fix everything if released, unaware of the severity of her actions. However, our resolve was unyielding. We informed her that she would never be allowed near our home again, and that we were pressing charges for property destruction. It was in that moment that the reality of facing legal consequences seemed to dawn on Emma. Panic set in as she turned to Anthony, carefully trying to portray me as the villain for insisting on accountability and pleading for his intervention. Her desperate plea, however, fell on deaf ears. United in our decision, we were determined to see the legal process through, ensuring that Emma faced the repercussions for her unwarranted intrusion and alterations to our home. Watching her grasp the reality of her situation marked a pivotal moment in our stand against her overbearing and invasive behavior. Anthony unequivocally supported my stance, and as he spoke, I could see Emma's astonishment. "Mom, Rebecca's right," he asserted. By transforming our home according to your preferences, you've disregarded our boundaries. It's time to face the consequences. After everything that had transpired, this was the final straw. Anthony firmly stated the breach of trust and respect that had occurred. Despite Emma's protests and her attempts to sway him with emotional appeals, he remained resolute. He emphasized the necessity of compensation for the extensive damage she had caused, highlighting the serious financial implications she now faced. When confronted with the reality of her actions and their consequences, Emma broke down. She hadn't anticipated the lawsuit or the significant dent it would make in her savings. Her tears and pleas for mercy were a stark contrast to her previous sense of entitlement. However, her claims of financial hardship did little to sway her decision. "You should have considered the consequences before taking such drastic actions," we countered. Her appeals for leniency, cloaked in claims of good intentions, were dismissed. Anthony and I recognized them for what they were: manipulation tactics. Our resolve remained firm, and despite Emma's tearful apologies and last-minute remorse, the damage to our home and our trust was irreparable. Leaving her at the police station, we returned home, ready to rebuild from the turmoil she had caused. Emma's release on bail and her subsequent uninvited appearance at our home only reinforced our decision. Once again, Anthony firmly delineated our boundaries, insisting on no further contact. Emma's desperate attempts to regain favor only confirmed the necessity of our actions in setting these boundaries and holding her accountable. Determined to protect our home, our peace, and our future from further disruption, we chose to remain in our damaged yet still habitable house. We awaited restitution through legal proceedings, and ultimately, the court ruled in our favor, mandating Emma to compensate us significantly. She narrowly escaped incarceration but was also ordered to cover our legal expenses. The judge expressed his disdain for her actions, reducing Emma to tears once more. However, any sympathy we had felt for her had long since evaporated. She was merely facing the consequences of her choices. Emma's social circle, including the friends she had involved in her scheme, quickly distanced themselves from her, unwilling to be associated with her follies. Following the court's decision, Emma approached us tearfully, appealing for forgiveness and lamenting her financial hardships, which had worsened due to the cessation of the financial support Anthony had provided. For years, he had generously given her an allowance, but he decided to halt it in light of her destructive behavior and the legal troubles that followed. Despite her desperate pleas highlighting her dire financial situation, we remained unmoved. Anthony stood firm in his resolve, stressing the importance of facing the repercussions of one's actions. Emma suggested moving into our guest room as a means to reconcile and perhaps regain financial stability, but we unequivocally refused. Anthony made it clear that she was no longer welcome in our home or our lives, signaling a period of no contact to allow us to heal and reassess her place in our lives, if there was any place left for her. Emma's reaction to Anthony's stance was one of disbelief and desperation, culminating in an emotional scene on our doorstep. However, having witnessed her manipulative tactics firsthand, we were resolute in our decision to sever ties. In the months that followed, we experienced newfound peace. The absence of Emma's judgmental presence allowed both Anthony and me to embrace a more carefree and positive outlook on life. This ordeal prompted us to consider maintaining this distance permanently, hopeful for a future free of turmoil and interference. As we navigate this journey, we seek support and understanding, believing that this decision will lead us toward the fulfilling life we've always envisioned. In a heartbeat, my world was shattered when my husband's voice, cold and harsh, blared through the phone. "Why do you always fall apart when I need you?" he scolded, seemingly blind to the urgency that had sent me rushing to the hospital, with our unborn child's safety hanging in the balance. "We're starving here, waiting for your awful cooking, while you're off lounging in the hospital," he went on, his tone completely devoid of empathy. He announced he'd had enough and was going out to eat with his parents, leaving me to find my own way home. His frustration pierced through the phone, blaming me for a crisis I had no control over, and only deepening my fear and worry for our unborn child, whom I was desperately trying to protect. I was once a dedicated cosmetic salesperson, known for my passion and commitment, with a collection of awards and a stellar reputation to prove it. My job fueled my confidence and was a source of immense pride. Meeting my husband felt like a fairy tale come true, leading to a whirlwind romance and marriage. However, the joy of discovering I was pregnant brought a difficult decision: leaving my job to reduce the risk of miscarriage, a choice I made for the sake of our family's future. As I faced the challenges of pregnancy, my husband's support began to dwindle. What had started as shared excitement soon turned into frustration. Simple tasks that once seemed easy now felt monumental, and my efforts to meet his expectations often fell short. "Where's my lunch?" he would ask, only to dismiss the simple sandwiches I managed to make, criticizing my sensitivity to smells. His words were cutting. Pregnancy is not an illness, belittling my struggles and leaving me to fend for myself. This change in his behavior was a stark contrast to the man I had fallen in love with. His presence at doctor's appointments dwindled, and his empathy for the household chores, which now felt overwhelming to me, seemed to vanish. Our home, once a sanctuary of mutual respect and love, was increasingly feeling like a battleground. I was left trying to protect not only my own well-being but also the health of our unborn child, desperately hoping that we might find our way back to understanding and support. Maybe he's just worn out, I told myself. He had recently taken on a mentorship role for a new colleague, which had been quite demanding. This could be why he seemed more impatient and irritable with me lately. I reassured myself that once our baby arrived, his busy schedule would settle, and we'd find our groove as a family. "It's going to be all right," I murmured, gently stroking my growing belly, clinging to hope despite the challenges of my changing body and the strain in our relationship. Unfortunately, things between my husband and me haven't improved. To make matters worse, my in-laws have begun dropping by unannounced, heightening my stress levels. They've scrutinized the cleanliness of our home and voiced concerns about how we'd cope once the baby arrived. Despite their criticisms, they expected immediate hospitality and demanded I whip up something for them on the spot. Caught off guard and unprepared, I felt overwhelmed and judged for not being a better host. Each visit ended with their disappointment, and my husband consistently sided with them, never defending me. Despite my best efforts, I felt perpetually inadequate in their eyes. During one of these visits, I was sent out to buy groceries despite being heavily pregnant. The strain proved too much, and I collapsed. When I woke up in the hospital, I learned that I had fainted from overexertion, but thankfully, our baby was still safe. The doctors advised a few days of rest in the hospital. I saw missed calls from my husband on my phone and realized he must have been worried when I didn't return from the store. However, when I finally called him back, hoping to hear concern or relief in his voice, I was met with anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his tone harsh and unforgiving, as if my health and our baby's safety were insignificant. His words left me shivering, feeling both hurt and abandoned. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to explain. "I collapsed at the grocery store and was taken to the hospital. They have me on IV fluids and want me to stay here for a few days for observation." But his response was cold and dismissive, as if my well-being was secondary to his own inconvenience. "You collapse, and I'm supposed to care. Why don't you answer my calls? You're so slow." His harsh words stung, and I dreaded the thought of our unborn child being exposed to such negativity. "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby," I pleaded, but my request for compassion fell on deaf ears. He remained unrelenting, indifferent to my plea for kindness. "We're starving here, waiting for your terrible cooking, and you're just lounging in the hospital," he said, his voice dripping with anger and lacking any trace of concern. His clear intention to go out with his parents and leave me to manage on my own, despite my condition, was crushing. His harsh words made me flinch, and not wanting to expose my baby to any more negativity, I ended the call, feeling profoundly alone and disheartened. As I returned to my hospital room, tears began to flow uncontrollably. In that vulnerable moment, a comforting voice reached out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to see Helen, a customer I had grown close to during my time as a cosmetics salesperson, offering me a towel. Recognizing her immediately, a wave of relief and warmth washed over me. "Helen, is it really you? I'm so glad you remember me," she said with a warm smile. Our unexpected reunion felt like a twist of fate, a much-needed reminder of kindness and human connection during my darkest hour. Helen had been more than just a customer. After a painful divorce, she had lost her self-confidence and stopped wearing makeup altogether. I vividly recalled the day I approached her at the cosmetics counter, offering to help her try some new products. The transformation in her appearance was more than just physical. It marked a moment of emotional healing and a step towards regaining her self-esteem. Over time, Helen became more than a client, she became a friend. But 5 years before I left my job, she had suddenly stopped coming, and I had always wondered what had happened to her. Now, here she was, a beacon of support at a time when I needed it most. "I had come back hoping to reconnect with you, Helen," she said, her voice tinged with surprise and disappointment. "When I visited your old workplace, I was taken aback to learn that you had left." "I'm sorry for dropping in so unexpectedly," Helen explained with a chuckle. "I've been working abroad, running a business, and it's been incredibly busy. It's been ages since I've had the chance to enjoy America and its cuisine, so I decided to come back once things calmed down a bit. And of course, right after I tried to find you, I ended up here with appendicitis." Her laughter brought a sense of lightness to the situation despite the circumstances. "It's only in the early stages, so medication should sort it out. And honestly, if this had happened while I was still abroad, the treatment costs would have been sky high. In a way, I'm relieved it happened here," Helen continued, her optimism and familiar smile proving as infectious as ever. This unexpected reunion lifted my spirits, and we began to joyfully reminisce about the past. As our conversation grew more heartfelt, Helen, with her ever-kind smile, gently inquired, "You don't have to share if you're not comfortable, but I noticed you seemed upset earlier. Is everything all right?" Feeling a deep trust in Helen, not just as a former customer but as a true friend, I felt compelled to open up. I opened up to Helen about the difficulties I was facing with my husband and in-laws. "I'm really concerned about bringing my child into this environment," I admitted. "I'm afraid they'll face the same treatment I do. And now, without my job, the thought of living independently, especially with a child, feels overwhelming." To my surprise, Helen made an incredibly generous offer. "I actually have an apartment that you could use. I manage a few properties as part of a project I developed on some inherited land. It's a cozy 2-bedroom with a separate bathroom, soundproof walls, and it's in a safe neighborhood close to supermarkets and a police station. There's no need for a deposit at the moment, and you can start paying rent whenever you're ready. It's a really good deal. What do you think?" Helen's enthusiasm was unmistakable, and her offer was so genuine it made me laugh in disbelief. "Are you sure you can offer it at such favorable terms?" I asked, deeply moved by her kindness. "Absolutely," Helen replied with a warm smile. "I trust you to take great care of the place, and I think it's crucial to support each other during tough times. You're more than welcome to stay there," she assured me, her generosity evident. Helen's unexpected kindness was a beacon of hope, providing not just a place to stay but a chance for a fresh start. Eager to support someone she valued, Helen offered her apartment, an act of generosity I couldn't turn down. With heartfelt gratitude, I accepted her offer. Days later, after receiving the doctor's approval, I left the hospital and moved straight into the apartment Helen had prepared for me. Her remarkable generosity was evident in how effortlessly she had arranged everything over the phone. I didn't go back to the home I had shared with my husband. Instead, I embraced this fresh start in Helen's warm and cozy apartment. Despite feeling guilty for not paying rent immediately, Helen reassured me with a laugh, insisting there was no rush. While my husband was at work, I quietly returned to our old home to gather my belongings, only to realize how little there truly felt like mine. The house seemed as empty as the ache in my heart within its walls. Helen's support extended beyond the apartment. She introduced me to a lawyer who had previously assisted her, reinforcing my decision to pursue a divorce. The lawyer's encouragement became a beacon of hope, and as each hospital visit confirmed the health of my growing baby, my resolve only grew stronger. During one such visit, as I stepped outside, my heart sank when I saw my husband waiting for me. Panic surged through me, and despite my best efforts to flee, my pregnancy slowed me down. He confronted me about the lawyer and our new living situation, gripping my arm tightly. I stood my ground, insisting that any discussions about the divorce, compensation, or child support be handled through the lawyer. His demands for me to return and his refusal to provide support were met with my firm refusal. As my husband tried to drag me back, a young woman intervened. Her name was Rebecca, and she was clearly familiar with my husband. stepping in front of me with a protective stance. Rebecca's presence shifted the dynamic of the confrontation. The tension between her and my husband was palpable, but Rebecca stood firm, refusing to let him take me against my will. Her resolve, coupled with the implied threat of calling the police, gave me a glimmer of hope and the courage to assert myself in the face of this unexpected conflict. When my husband heard the mention of the police, he looked alarmed and quickly left. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief that made my legs go weak. Rebecca quickly moved to my side, offering support. "Are you okay?" she asked gently as I apologized, expressing how grateful I was for her help. Without hesitation, Rebecca called a taxi for me, insisting on ensuring I got home safely. Despite feeling guilty for causing her trouble, she reassured me it was no bother. When I shared my address, Rebecca was surprised to discover that I lived just below her. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca, with her cheerful and caring demeanor, turned out to be a new employee at my husband George's workplace. She had reported George's inappropriate behavior, which led to his removal as her mentor. George was notorious for his lack of empathy towards female employees, often making insensitive remarks about personal matters like menstruation and marriage. Rebecca's experiences echoed my own, highlighting the troubling behavior I had endured from him during my pregnancy. 3 weeks after our meeting, Rebecca and I had become good friends, enjoying dinners together and sharing our lives. She informed me that George had been transferred to a subsidiary company following numerous complaints and issues at work. It turned out that Rebecca was the daughter of Helen, the successful businesswoman who managed several properties, including the apartment I was staying in. George had previously boasted about handling Helen's account, but his behavior ultimately led to a reassessment of his professional standing. Helen had advocated for George's transfer after uncovering his misconduct both at work and towards me. Rebecca, resourceful and determined, had tackled workplace issues independently without leaning on her mother's influence. However, upon discovering my connection to Helen, she felt a stronger sense of duty to act. Helen encouraged Rebecca to compile all evidence against George, which contributed to his transfer. With George now facing reduced income and an increased workload, his situation had markedly changed. Helen's advice to me, drawing on her extensive experience, was to remain resolute and not be swayed by any attempts George might make to elicit sympathy. Her guidance was a source of great reassurance, coming from someone with such expertise and understanding. After deciding to divorce George, he attempted to reach out through our lawyer, expressing how challenging work had been and how much he missed me. He even apologized and pleaded for a chance to reconcile, but I remained resolute in my decision to proceed with the divorce. Supported by Helen, George ultimately had no choice but to accept the divorce terms and agree to pay child support and damages over time. My next significant hurdle was dealing with my in-laws, particularly my father-in-law, who was overly eager about the baby being a boy. I could sense trouble brewing, and my concerns were soon validated. One day, as I was about to leave, my father-in-law grabbed my arm. Having followed Rebecca in an attempt to confront her, he instead found me. He demanded that I surrender the baby once born, insisting that the child was the family's heir. Despite my efforts to escape, his grip was firm and unyielding. Just then, a commanding voice cut through the tension, demanding my father-in-law release me. Before I could react, Rebecca executed a precise judo move, sending him sprawling to the ground. It turned out that Rebecca, a top-ranked judoka with national titles, had mastered judo to protect herself and her mother during challenging times. She confronted my father-in-law, condemning him for ignoring George's behavior and trying to interfere in my life. Rebecca firmly defended my right to move forward, making it clear that any interference was unacceptable. As the sound of approaching sirens grew louder, I realized Rebecca had called for help before stepping in to rescue me. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting nearby in the car, observed silently as the police arrived and took both her and my father-in-law into custody. In the aftermath, my father-in-law was arrested, and after some reflection, my mother-in-law chose to divorce him. She decided to start anew, moving back to the countryside to live a life free from external pressures. Despite George's pleas to accompany her, expressing his frustration with his job and the legal battles, she firmly refused, prioritizing her own fresh start over his desires. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law reached out to offer her apologies and left a sum of money as a gesture of goodwill. Helen explained that it's not uncommon for people to feel lost after a divorce, and the money was likely her mother-in-law's way of apologizing and supporting my son's future. Although her past behavior had been troubling, I was touched by her effort to make amends and appreciated the support. Following the finalization of the divorce, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My mother-in-law chose to settle in the countryside, preferring a life of solitude over remaining with George. When my father-in-law was eventually released, he found that the house had been demolished by my mother-in-law before her departure. Left with few options, he moved in with George, which only added to their difficulties and contributed to George's resignation from his job due to his tarnished reputation. Despite the challenges, the child support payments continued to arrive reliably, likely managed by Helen and the lawyer Rebecca, recognized for her hard work, advanced to a project leader role, earning admiration from her colleagues. Helen's ventures, including women-only properties and housing for foreigners, were thriving. As for me, once my son grew a bit older, I planned to return to work. Helen had offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. Helen remained a steadfast supporter, showering my son with affection as if he were her own grandchild. Rebecca also made time to visit us, her presence a comforting reminder of the strength and kindness that had carried me through the toughest times. Inspired by these remarkable women, I was determined to be equally strong and protective of my son, embracing the support and resilience they have shown me.
Greetings, my name is Marty, and I'm currently a senior in college, majoring in linguistics. My relationship with my parents has never been perfect. They were always okay, but their love and affection were lacking. I could have accepted it if that was just their way, but it stung because I knew they were capable of being loving and supportive parents, as proven by my adopted brother, Mason. They showered Mason with more affection and attention than they ever did with me, their biological son. Don't get me wrong, I believe in giving an orphan child a loving home, but it's hard not to resent them for neglecting my emotional needs. Our differences became unbearable when I entered college. Mason was still in high school, while I had to fend for myself, covering my tuition and living expenses at the mere age of 18. Facing substantial financial challenges, I reluctantly approached my parents for help, hoping for some support. However, they coldly refused, claiming I was old enough to provide for myself. They argued that their responsibility was to make me self-sufficient, having already cared for me until high school. It felt like they had abandoned me, treating me like a mere foster child and tossing me aside when I came of age. I worked 2 jobs, struggled through my courses, and even resorted to ghostwriting and teaching language classes to make ends meet. I fought hard, but it was a constant battle. My dream was to survive until graduation, after which I planned to secure a full-time job and pause my education until I could afford it. Meanwhile, back at home, Mason lived a life of luxury. Every holiday, he received extravagant gifts, including a car, something I had begged my parents for but was denied. I saved every penny for my tuition, while he enjoyed their financial backing without a worry in the world. This year, as Mason prepared for college, my parents not only paid his tuition, but also covered all his expenses, from his dorm to his car's insurance. The disparity between their treatment of us was a harsh blow. I couldn't bear it any longer. Borrowing a friend's car, I drove home, finding their nonchalant attitude about the situation infuriating. When I unexpectedly appeared, my mother feigned concern, but it was too little, too late. The resentment I felt towards my parents and the unfairness of their actions had reached its breaking point. I could have mistaken my mother's expression for concern, but it wasn't Thanksgiving or Christmas, and she had made it clear that those were the only times I was welcome in their home. I couldn't help but confront them, asking why they were supporting Mason financially, especially after essentially abandoning me when I started college. My dad grew tense but explained that Mason's major was in music, a difficult field to find stable work in initially. They felt compelled to assist him. I had worked odd jobs and waited tables to put food on my table, majoring in linguistics. Their excuse felt hollow. That night, I told my parents that they needn't worry about setting another plate for me. They could give everything to the son they loved more. Walking away, I was crushed, unable to comprehend why they never loved me. My resentment towards Mason grew. I recalled moments when my parents had showered me with attention, taking me out to play, and my mom cooking my favorite breakfast. Then they brought Mason home, and my life changed. I resented them for adopting an orphan boy and leaving me to fend for myself. After struggling through college and years of hard work, I finally achieved the financial stability I craved. I graduated, got a car, paid my rent in advance, and saved some money. Life was tough, but it was finally good. Karma was cruel, but it also had a way of balancing things out. 3 years later, Mason called me in the middle of the night, begging me to pick him up from California while I lived in Chicago. Reluctantly, I agreed, sensing fear and sickness in his voice. When I arrived, I found him in a pitiful state, unkempt, soaked from the rain, and his eyes bloodshot. As he hugged me and began crying, I knew what was coming. He was begging for money, despite my hatred for him. His desperation almost evoked pity, but I steeled myself against it. I asked him to explain his homeless situation, but all he did was plead for money, claiming he owed it to someone who would kill him if he didn't repay. I had neither the time nor the money for this, but he was still my brother. I couldn't just abandon him. We grew up together. I had known him since he was just 3 months old. Despite my frustration, I decided to take him to my place, hoping we could discuss his situation there. He fell asleep within 15 minutes of the drive. I ended up driving him to my parents' house. The journey took about 40 minutes from Chicago. I felt it was necessary for my parents to see the result of all the money they had poured into Mason. Perhaps it was a move of both concern and retribution, but deep down, I knew I was wrong too. Upon my arrival at my parents' house around 2 in the morning, I was nervous. The last time I had spoken to them was when I confronted them about their parenting. Since then, there had been silence. Even my mother, who lived less than an hour away, never bothered to visit or check on me. But now they could see the consequences of their choices. I rang the doorbell, and it took 15 minutes for my parents to come downstairs, dressed in their robes. They glanced at me, then at Mason, who was barely aware of his surroundings. Surprise flickered in their eyes, not for Mason's state, but for my unexpected presence. They were aware of Mason's struggles with drugs. I brought Mason inside, laying him on the living room couch, and then explained the situation to both of them. They looked pained. I was about to leave when my mother stopped me, insisting I stay for some coffee. Despite the palpable tension, I decided to stay, compelled by a desire to understand the complexities of the situation with Mason. We sat at the kitchen table, and my mom began explaining the situation. Apparently, Mason had dropped out of college, and a year later, he joined some trouble, or rather, trouble caught up with him. The authorities called Dad, informing him that Mason had damaged campus property and had to pay for it. My dad did pay, but he was deeply disappointed. He confronted Mason, urging him to come home and enroll in a community college, at least completing his education before finding work. However, Mason refused and tried to sever ties. Then, the worst happened. Some thugs came to our house, threatening my dad that they would harm Mason if their money wasn't returned. Dad paid them off, attempting to bring Mason home, but he fled. 2 days later, they found him in California, where he had fallen into drugs. My mother began to cry at this point, revealing that they had placed him in a rehab facility in California 4 months ago. That was the last time they had seen him before I brought him back home. I had no immediate solution to offer, so I left, but I can't deny that I felt a strange sense of relief when both my parents hugged me and invited me to dinner this Thanksgiving. I wondered if I was wrong for feeling a twisted sense of joy over my brother's downfall. Not the whole. I wouldn't even blame your brother. It's your parents who are at fault. They've driven a wedge between their sons due to their misguided parenting. You helped your brother, which shows you're a good person. Well, your brother's life is in ruins, and you're happy that your mother wants to invite you for dinner. It might seem petty and mean, but I'd say you're not the whole if you can't understand the concept of empathy. My dad and stepmom have way too many kids, and I, a 15-year-old female, have a biological sister who is 13. We also have 7 adopted siblings, 3 boys and 4 girls, most of whom have some issues. Living with them is like walking on eggshells. This story centers on Abby, the oldest of the adopted kids at 15. They just took Abby in a few months ago, and they're in the process of adopting her. Before Abby, my dad and stepmom claimed they were done fostering and adopting kids. However, they made an exception because 2 of the girls they adopted 3 years ago are Abby's biological sisters. I have to say, Abby is probably the most challenging among the adopted kids. She doesn't talk much when we're all together. She just sits next to my stepmom or one of the nannies. She's also quite possessive about her things. For instance, if she has a pack of cookies and I eat one, she won't touch them anymore and will look for something else to eat. The same goes for video games. She enjoys playing Minecraft and will let us join her. But if we mess with anything she's built, the entire world becomes ruined for her. To address her eating habits, my dad and stepmom put a snack bar in Abby's room because there are days when she won't leave her room and sometimes won't allow anyone in. They hope this will encourage her to eat on those days. I once checked out Abby's room when she was in therapy and noticed she had a stash of really good snacks in there. She's also a music enthusiast and owns a collection of headphones, including AirPods Pro, AirPods Max, 2 different kinds of Bose headphones, and another kind that I can't identify. Abby came with one of the Bose headphones, but the rest were gifts for my dad, stepmom, and their family. She's constantly obsessed with having her headphones on and ensures they're always charged. One day, Abby, my stepmom, and my sister were hanging out in my dad's room. I needed headphones but couldn't find mine, so I ventured into Abby's strictly off-limits room, an area accessible only to my stepmom and one of the nannies. I borrowed her AirPods Max and grabbed a fruit roll-up and a bag of cookies from her snack bar. I intended to charge the headphones and return them once I was done using them. When Abby discovered someone had been in her room, she threw a tantrum. It took my stepmom and the nanny the entire day to calm her down. They eventually found out I had entered her room and tried to reprimand me. I felt Abby was overreacting, and if anything, she should be the one facing consequences for her tantrum. In response, they attempted to ground me. Feeling unfairly treated, I called my mom and explained the situation. She came to pick me up to avoid my grounding due to Abby's outburst. Now, my dad is upset with me for breaking the rules and going to my mom to escape punishment. I wanted to know if I was in the wrong. I messed up. I was in the wrong. It's apparent now, Abby might be autistic or might have suffered from abuse in her past. There's a reason her room is off limits, a reason she acts the way she does. What's worse, it seems like she's never done anything to warrant such casual disregard for her boundaries. If I were your dad, I would insist you stay at your mom's until you're ready to apologize and accept your grounding. I would also extend the grounding for playing the card of going to your mom's to avoid punishment. You're the one at fault here. Foster kids, especially when new to a family, can be very difficult, struggling to adapt. That doesn't make you or her a bad person. However, what makes you wrong is going into her room, knowing it's off limits, stealing, not borrowing her things. You know she won't use things that others have used, and you went behind everyone's back to get what you wanted. Shifting gears, my mother passed away last year, and we're nearing the end of the legal process in just a few weeks. Over the past 6 months, my husband has been eyeing a range of things that, on a regular day, we definitely cannot afford. Normally, he'd have to use credit or save for weeks or even months. It's fine to wish for things or work towards treats, but he hasn't made an effort to save for these costly purchases. Instead, he's been pressuring me for updates on the legal process and asking how much longer it'll take. I've given him very little to no information because, at this point, things could still change significantly. Creditors might emerge, claiming money is owed, and so on. He's not the most responsible person with money. I've managed our finances full-time for the past 3 years because he has a history of sabotaging our financial goals and blowing our budgets. My plan is to use half of my inheritance to move our family into a house. I intend to save 40% to help my children in the future for their graduations, college, trips, or their first cars, and maintain a small emergency fund. This was something we couldn't do before because my husband kept giving money to his side of the family, depleting our accounts and leading us to homelessness 3 separate times. I understand the importance of helping family, but it's difficult for me to grasp the idea of allowing my 3 children and wife to become homeless just because an adult family member can't be responsible enough to pay their own bills or stay out of legal trouble. I fear waking up one day to find out that every cent of my inheritance has been spent behind my back. I would like to open an account in my name and proceed with the plan I mentioned earlier. My husband has made it clear that he intends to spend the money on new vehicles, tech gadgets, and other items solely for himself, not for our children or to secure our family's future. When I discuss investing or saving for our children's future, he dismisses it, claiming life is too short for such considerations. His response is that our children should work for what they want when they become adults, which seems contradictory given his recent actions. I'm certain that if his parents pass away, we'll be responsible for paying off their debts and covering any unknown costs out of our own pockets. Financially speaking, I started my marriage completely debt-free, and I've worked hard for years to help my husband achieve the same status. However, in the past decade, he has paid off his parents' credit card and IRS debts. They live paycheck to paycheck and believe saving money is pointless. I'm not sure if I'm making the right choice, but I simply want my children to experience the same happy and stress-free childhood I had. Am I in the wrong here? Not the whole. Seek legal advice to set everything up in a way that prevents him from having any claim to the money. Open a separate account without his name on it, and avoid putting his name on the house deed. Regarding the debts of his parents, if you are in the U.S., you won't have to pay them. It comes out of their estate. And if there's no money in the estate, it doesn't come from your family's funds. You might consider lying to him about the amount and the timing, telling him it's a fraction of the true amount and that it will take 2 years to receive. This would give you time to figure out how to safeguard the money from his impulsive spending. Consult a lawyer soon, as nothing prevents him from opening new credit cards and charging extravagant purchases with the intention to pay them off using your inheritance. The air conditioner's gentle hum in my workspace stood out sharply from the whirlwind of ideas racing through my head. I'm a lawyer named Anna, and I'm 28 years old. It's a far way from the chaos of my early years, a past I even kept hidden from my closest friends and family. The calmness of the ringing shattered my office. On my phone, the screen revealed an indeterminate quantity, but something about it felt unsettlingly similar to a cautious hand. I spoke in response. I spoke up. Speak with a combination of expertise and Anna. Be careful. Your father has arrived. There was an anxiousness in the voice that didn't do anything to stop my rising fear. A shiver went through me. More than 10 years have passed since I last heard that voice. A once meaningful voice, loving care, but has turned into a symbol of grief and betrayal. Why are you contacting me? I asked to speak for myself, severing with precision. During the quiet that ensued after his first things first, I'm having problems. Anna, I need financial assistance from you. He mentioned, his voice breaking somewhat his request, even though it maybe started a fire of bitterness within of me. My contribution now I shot back after all these years. Belief and rage coexisted in my tone. To be sure, but if it weren't, I'm in a real pickle. Continuing Ed's deteriorating, desperate state. His voice, you've long since ceased to be my father. You can't just phone me right now, and you may count on my assistance, I answered vocally. Chilly, and there was a steady pause on the line. A thick stillness that resembled an irreconcilable divide. Anna, please, I'm still. Your father made a pathetic attempt to renewing an old friendship. Putting out the word dad felt strange, almost startling. A father, you lost that title, I remarked when you chose her over me. The years of grief and resentment being incorporated into my speech. I believed you were mistaken, my daughter. I spoke up and stopped him. Halfway through, you made your decision years. His voice was years ago, and now that I've made mine, a mixture of desperation and begging. Hello, Anna? I'm sorry, but I need your help once. I'm sorry reverberated through my office like a hollow and pointless apologies don't alter historical events. I'm unable to assist you. Declared forcefully and disconnected my childhood before the age of 10. I was occupied with laughter and love are evidence of I had a fantastic existence with my parents. Within our modest rental home, my mom ray of happiness and compassion lit our warm days. And our evenings with tales and dreams. My dad used to be silly, and an understanding man would play all night. Playing games or giving me small lessons. The world's things, our house was a happy cocoon where each day was an exploration, and each evening a lovely dream. But our comfortable existence came to an end. Sudden end following my mother's premature. The mansion that used to resound with death, love, and laughter became quiet. A portion of recollections, I strolled through the rooms. Every nook serves as a sharp reminder of it was an awful loss without her. Not only for myself, but also for my dad, who having lost his beloved life, yet the intensity of his sorrow appeared to decline swiftly. Much to my confusion and shock, in a matter of months later, he brought Marissa, a woman, home, who was going to play a big part in our life. I remember the moment he brought, a day that signified the conclusion of my treasured childhood. Anna, this is Marissa. She intends to remain with one evening. My father declared, his voice lacking the warmth that I saw. I looked up at her, accustomed to this, looking for a little maternal warmth, but discovered none in her. Her towering appearance, her icy stare, and starting at the very beginning, noticed a difference in the atmosphere, one that gave me an inexplicable feeling of fearful hello. Anna, Marissa called out. Silky but lacking in a genuine sense. The smile seemed to soothe rather than conceal a terrible element behind its reveal themselves. In the days that followed, the home seemed altered, as though the walls, they were pulling away from her presence. The happy recollections of the time appeared to slip away, giving way to a persistent discomfort that permeated every corner. I recall glancing at Marissa, searching for a redeeming thing or thoughtful of her, yet her appearance, the motion appeared to contain an unsaid hatred. It was evident that she wasn't keen to take up the space left by my mother. Nonetheless, to create a new story in which I was an awkward aspect of her that I observed. Stroll around our house, which used to felt content and safe. I was unable to assist, however, felt as though her coming was only the start of a particular thing. Unsettling, the way she gazed at me with eyes with a tendency to conceal more than they revealed was not encouraging for the future. The time after Marissa's arrivals resembled strolling via a nightmare from which I was unable to awaken. There was a time when my mother's love and laughter felt chilly now. Marissa's unwelcome presence created a shadow covering all that, transforming even the easiest daily schedules into a sequence of battles. While having breakfast one morning, my dinner seemed abnormally salty, I noted. Marissa, did you over-season it with salt? This, my voice inquired. Hesitant, did I? It has to be an error, Anna. Eat it, don't be so picky, she shot back, her voice disdainful. Nearly jesting, the occurrences increased in frequency. Additionally resentful, I recall discovering my clothes destroyed following a laundry. Marissa, all of my clothing is faded, the question I posed one day, displaying my old favorite outfit, now stained and unfit. She took a quick look at it, and, with a shrug casually, perhaps the washing machine is misbehaving, or maybe it's time you give up wearing such juvenile attire. Garments, a wave of annoyance swept through me, but further arguments would exacerbate the situation. Worse, I felt powerless and resorted to my father, Expecting him to be able to look past her Marissa, the fixad dad, is destroying my stuff. She mistreats me every time. One, I said. Evening, trembling with a combination of fury, and my dad's response was rather, compared to my expectations, Anna, you're thinking that Marissa is abusing her to assimilate into our family and cease causing problems. He stated sharply, his remarks cutting deep. But that's the reality, Dad. Protest attempt. But he refused to listen. Anna, that's enough. I'm not interested in to hear your allegations repeated, said, his voice erupting with rage at each day was difficult to traverse. Concerning Marissa's animosity and my dad's apathy toward the place that previously felt like home. I felt like a jail instead of a haven. I began to spend more time in my chamber, attempting to get away from the ongoing stress that was suspended in the air residing in that scary mansion. I felt isolated and misinterpreted the security and contentment that previously occupied those walls were in place of dread and worry daily. I yearned for the days gone by, for the occasions when my mom's grin was sufficient to illuminate the entire space. Striking contrast with the current gloom lurked around every corner, coexisting alongside. Marissa turned into a daily struggle to avoid. Additionally, perseverance, her hatred for me grew from insults to physical attacks, torture. It began with a gentle pinch on my arm or a twist in my abdomen every time. In areas that are readily hidden beneath my garments, the hurt was brutal and intense. A prompting of my powerlessness in her presence, I devised plans to stay away from. She is aware of her location at all times. I used to drive vast distances inside the house to hold off till she is in another room. Before, despite my best efforts, I moved around. Sometimes, I was taken off guard by her. And those instances invariably led to experiencing any discomfort one day when I was reading in silence in the living room. When Marissa entered, there was no apparent reason to pinch my arm firmly using her nails. I winced in agony as it dug into my skin, but suppressed any cries of protest. She gave me a chilly glance, a victorious grin before moving away on one of Grandma's infrequent visits. She observed my circumspect moves and how I recoiled at the sound of Marissa's voice. Anna is resonating throughout the home. Grandma, everything is well at home? Questioned, a worried tone in her voice. I stared at her, wanting to tell her so badly, the truth to her, but fear and the need to. I restrained myself so as not to cause her anxiety. Yes, Grandma, I'm back. Everything is all right. I told her I had a lot of schoolwork, but I wasn't using a fake smile. She appeared uncertain, yet didn't push any harder. I experienced a touch of shame for tricking her. Yet I was unable to bear the idea of upsetting her in any way dismay that night when Grandmother departed. I noticed Marissa observing her through the glass. Expression of contentment it was as if she had enjoyed knowing that she influenced me, I would have suffered harm, and succeeded in doing so. Her victorious expression strongly indicated she was the one in charge, and I was utterly defenseless. Participant in her twisted game, I felt like going back to my room, enmeshed in a vicious cycle of silence and cruelty. The actual discomfort caused by Marissa's pinches and turns were tolerable in contrast to the mental chaos. I thought of school as my haven, a place where I might momentarily forget the suffering of my domestic life. However, even there, the outlines of my problems at home started to come through. Mrs. Thompson, my instructor, is a good-hearted person. A woman who constantly gave her students encouragement. One day, I began to detect changes in myself. When I turned in my homework, she firmly gripped my wrist while focusing on my arm's bruises. What, Anna? Occurred here? These resemble bruises. She claimed that worry was in her voice. I swiftly retracted my arm, enveloping my sleeve is bruised. Nothing at all, Mrs. Thompson. I collapsed. I pretended to be lying while dodging her stare. Mrs. Thompson averted her gaze. Persuaded Anna, should there be any incorrect, or if someone is harming you, can inform me of the significance of speaking up. She asked her eyes to look for the reality that I desired to reveal to her, give her all the details regarding Marissa and how I was always afraid, yet the words failed to flow, so I pushed "I'm all right." Mrs. Thompson honestly grinned. It was only a careless mishap. She presented me with a long, introspective glance, followed by a nod gradually. "Okay, Anna, but keep in mind the door is never closed. You're not by yourself," remarked, smiling consolingly at me. I nodded as a knot started to grow in my throat. Her generosity added to it, challenging to keep up the facade that everything went smoothly. As I particular day, Mrs. Thompson's walk home, phrases replayed in my head. I experienced a mixture of appreciation for her thoughtfulness and a sincere the feeling of isolation brought on by bearing my burdens by itself. The idea of disclosing the reality. At home, my existence was horrifying, and I worried about the outcomes. What Marissa would do if she became aware of it had mentioned. I was silent that evening, having supper with someone. Pondering Mrs. Thompson's words offered to assist Marissa when I became speechless. "Why is everyone quiet tonight? Anna Kitty received your tongue," she questioned mockingly. I just shook my head and carried on with my meal, attempting to minimize my size and imperceptible as possibilities while I lay in bed after supper. The truth of my circumstances felt more and more than ever formidable. Mrs. Thompson's concern had convinced me that individual's the problem, but the dread of what exposes the maybe the truth prevented me from speaking. I was between the desperate need to communicate someone and Marissa's fear of it takes balance to retaliate. I traversed daily the day my instructor, Mrs. Thompson, chose to include me in Father's Day was a day full of stress and fear for me. In the principal's office, I'd office twitching uncomfortably, my thoughts frantically worrying about how my father would respond if he ever made it to his stern face revealed a mixture of annoyance and humiliation. "What's up with Anna? Are you calling me to come to your school?" With a strong voice, he demanded this. He entered. My eyes slid to Mrs. Thompson. Looking for some reassurance, I swallowed hard and searched for my voice. Dad and Mrs. Thompson observed what she saw. "Bruises." I stumbled, sensing the burden of his stare before I could respond. Moreover, he suppressed his rage. "Tangible." "What are you talking about, bruises? Once more, you are inventing stories." Mrs. Thompson intervened, speaking sternly, yet composed. "Mr. Smith, I'm worried about Anna's condition, and the bruises on her arm do not appear unintentional, which needs to be addressed." My father's expression darkened slightly with anger. "At home, she is pretty safe. Anna, are you misrepresenting our family?" Turning to face me, he looked disappointed. Let loose the tears I'd been holding in, began to leak. "Dad, it's not a lie. Marissa has been injuring me." I was able to exit the truth at last emerging. His response was one of complete "Marissa, it's unbelief that's absurd. She has only shown kindness. I will not allow you to accuse her in your eyes, using these charges, but the facts are actual." Dad called out, pleading with him to accept it. With a start, he got up, his patient. "Tell Mrs. that you're wearing this too thin." "Thompson, all of that was made up." I dutifully faced the instructor and reiterated his. She nodded again without speaking. "Anything while returning home empty-handed," said another way. He kept me trapped in my room. Using the door, I could perceive Marissa's voice brimming with deceptive worry. "I told you that she's only looking for." I sat on my bed, she added, paying attention, having a strong sense of loneliness and sorrow at the one person I believed I could guarantee that he had turned the walls of my room, which are facing me, had previously seemed to be my haven, but now I lay there feeling like I was inside a prison. There, reflecting on all that had occurred as a result of the physical abuse's suffering, was insignificant in contrast to the emotional, the agony of not being believed, and my father punished me. It was a severe understanding that the individual who was meant to adore and guard me unwaveringly was now the origin of my deepest agony in the days after my confinement. Among the darkest were those in my chamber. had already felt imprisoned entirely and helpless. I realized that my only chance lay. On my mother's side, my granny was a compassionate and loving woman with always been kind to me, but I never thought to bother her with my problems one night at home while I was my father and Marissa had their hands full. I plucked up the bravery to give I was shaking my hands, Grandma, as I dialed her phone number. "Hi," her reassuringly warm voice said. "Over the phone." "Anna here, Grandma," stated, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "Anna, how are you, my love?" she questioned, her style. Tears filled with sincere concern welled up. When I answered, "Grandma, I need in my eyes. I would like to remain with you Although there was a brief period of stillness on what went wrong with Anna on the other end, I had an experience. Therefore, I took a deep breath, words flying out of my mouth. "It's Marissa has harmed Mom and Dad. Won't accept me. I am still trying to figure out what to do." Her voice carried concern, which I could perceive as. She answered right away, "Of course, my love. You immediately approach. I will attend to." The day my grandmother arrived was this one. Even though she was little, her presence filled the space. She faced my dad with a strength that took me by surprise. "John, Anna isn't coming with me. Safe here," she proclaimed. With firmness, my father retreated and attempted to Mom. "You can't just take her," I argue. "She's your daughter, mine, and you unable to defend," she retorted. Acerbic, I refused to observe her. Marissa attempted to step in, but she's merely a kid inventing tales. You are unable to have faith in her instead of us. Grandma looked at Marissa's gaze. "Steely, I can tell when a child is afraid. I'm bringing one, Anna, and if you attempt to halt me, I'll take this issue up with the officials." My father became aware that he was beaten and gave up trying to fight back. Opposition when I grabbed my belongings, I noticed. Marissa went from having a stubborn expression to overcoming. Stepping outside the home with my grandmother, I had a release of weight. Shoulders. I felt safe for the first time in months. It was a calm drive to Grandma's house, although her existence was consoling. When we got there, she turned to me and told me, "Anna, you're secure now. I'm no longer concerned about my grandmother's home. I experienced the affection and protection that had been absent from my life, serve as a haven for my healing, and use the contrast to regain my strength." Between her nourishing house and my father's home was glaringly cold. First time in a very long time. Sensed that my breathing had returned. Escaped the worry and fear that had troubled me. It had been years since I had gone to reside at my father's house with my granny, the place she'd lived in sanctuary, a haven of love and healing. But time has moved on, and with it created a fresh wave of transformation in my cherished grandma departed, leaving a gap that seems impossible. At the funeral that Marissa and my father attended, their features, a mixture of fake sadness and ill-dressed zeal. It was apparent they were more interested in the potential benefits of rather than lamenting her death. Morning following the funeral, as we assembled at Marissa, I wasted no time at my grandmother's house. "Timing nicely, Anna. I assume you'll be finding a new place to live now. House and everything in it belongs to your father now," she said in her voice, tinted with a barely concealed glee. My father nodded in accord, eyes surveying the room as if already planning what to do with the house. Couldn't help but smile, a reaction that seemed to confuse them. "Actually, that's where you're wrong," I said, the confidence in my voice taking them by surprise. "What do you mean?" my father inquired, his visage turning to one of bewilderment. I took a long breath, enjoying the moment. Grandma left a will. She bequeathed the house and a considerable amount of money to me, I explained, observing as their expressions altered from bewilderment to startled. "But you're just a child. I'm your father. I should be in charge of the inheritance you receive," my father sputtered, his sense of entitlement evident. Marissa chimed in her voice, shrilly stating, "Until you come of age, your father will handle your property well." Prospects, their reactions were almost amusing. "You don't care about me. So much that you didn't even wish me a happy bay. I turned 18 a month ago. I'm legally an adult now, and I make my own decisions, I stated firmly, relishing the face of awareness to dawning on their fronts. My father's expression shifted from shock to rage, then to a sort of desperate pleading. Anna, you can't do. This is your family. I glanced at their memories of my childhood flooding back. You paused. Being my family a long time ago, I remarked. My voice is steady. Marissa stepped forward, her tone now imploring, at least let us stay in the house. We have nowhere else to go. We have not extended the lease of our residence. I shook my head. This is my house currently. You'll need to find somewhere else. As they left, the weight of years of pain and neglect appeared to lift my shoulders. I stood in the house that was as mine, a place loaded with memories of my grandmother's love, and felt a sense of closure. The echoes of the past, my father's call stirred remained. I sat their phone in. Hand sensation, a tumult of feelings, wrath, betrayal, and a sense of injustice. But amid all that, there was also a sense of strength and a reminder of the resilience that had carried me through the depths of times.
Wow, can you believe she's not doing anything even though she's about to have her baby? What kind of parent does that make her? When I opened the front door, I saw my daughter Jessica and her husband Thomas. Thomas looked unhappy and started complaining about the dusty floor and dirty bathroom. He seemed to think that because Jessica wasn't cleaning, it was my fault as her parent. I tried to explain that Jessica's pregnant belly made it hard for her to clean, but Thomas didn't listen. Instead, he said he was leaving Jessica because she couldn't keep the house clean. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 54 years old. I work for a big company, and it's just been me and Jessica since her dad passed away. Raising Jessica by myself was tough, but her happiness always made it worth it. Jessica is a kind and caring person with good friends, but she struggled to find a boyfriend. I hoped she'd meet someone in high school or college, but she didn't. Eventually, she started dating a guy she met through a friend, and they got engaged after a couple of years. I was happy for her, even though it meant she'd move out soon. Jessica's husband, Thomas, is older than her and really focused on his career. He often stays late at work or goes out, leaving Jessica to do all the chores. I thought they should share the chores, but I didn't want to interfere too much in their lives. Then, about 6 months after their wedding, Jessica invited me to lunch to tell me she's pregnant. Jessica always loved children, even though she didn't have any siblings herself. She used to talk about wanting a little brother or sister. But since I didn't plan to remarry, I couldn't give her that. Despite being married, Jessica still wanted kids, and she spoke to her belly with love, showing how excited she was to become a mom. Seeing her like this made me really happy. As we said goodbye after lunch, I reminded Jessica that I'm here for her if she needs anything. During Jessica's pregnancy, she kept working, so I made sure to check on her often. But when I got a big work project that meant I'd be traveling a lot, I worried about leaving her. Jessica reassured me she'd be fine, so I threw myself into my work. By the time Jessica was close to giving birth, my project was almost done, and things were calming down at work. I called Jessica to talk about plans for when the baby arrived, but Thomas answered the phone instead. He said Jessica was being useless, and that he was bringing her over to my place. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found Jessica looking really messy next to Thomas. When I opened the door, she seemed different, not even able to muster a smile. Her eyes had dark circles under them, and her hair, nails, and skin looked dry. She didn't look like a woman in her 20s at all. Her hands were cracked and bleeding, and she seemed distant, staring off into space. How could she have changed so much in just a few months? I let them inside and had them sit down. Since Jessica couldn't speak, I asked Thomas what was going on. "Thomas, why is Jessica like this?" I demanded. He seemed surprised and didn't show any shame as he replied, "Are you blaming me? She's the one who slowed down because of her big belly. You know, housework is a woman's job, and she even faked being sick to get out of it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You made a pregnant Jessica do all the chores, even when she was feeling sick. Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know. She even asked me for help with the chores while I've been working all day. Anyway, she's struggling and not able to do her chores. So please take care of her until she gives birth." That's when I realized this man had no clue about pregnancy or being a good father. I couldn't trust him to take care of my daughter. "Okay, I'll take care of her. I can't rely on you to look after her properly." When I told Thomas, he snapped back, "Well, if your daughter's a mess, it's because you didn't raise her right. She doesn't even know how to treat her husband without a father figure. I'm the one suffering here. Once the baby's born, come get it. And in the meantime, teach your daughter how to behave, Rebecca." Before he left, he told me to fix my daughter's upbringing before the baby arrived. Then he just walked away, leaving Jessica behind. I couldn't believe his nerve. I regretted letting Jessica marry him deeply. She just sat there, looking so lost. First things first, I needed to make her feel safe. So I went to the kitchen, poured some milk into her favorite cup with a bit of sugar, and warmed it up. "Be careful, it's hot," I warned her as I handed it over. As Jessica sipped the warm milk, she couldn't hold back her tears. They streamed down her face as she sobbed. I sat beside her, comforting her with a gentle rub on her back, ready to listen to whatever she needed to say. Jessica opened up about Thomas. Despite her pregnancy, he continued going to work parties and leaving her alone when she needed him. He wouldn't lift a finger to help around the house and even demanded she do chores when she was feeling sick from being pregnant. "Hey, get up. You've been lounging around. You haven't done the dishes or laundry," he'd say. Sometimes, he'd come home after drinking with colleagues and make her cook and clean for them. I felt my anger rising, hearing how my pregnant daughter was being treated like a servant. Jessica explained that she didn't want to risk my career, so she put up with it. She even asked doctors to explain to Thomas of the changes her body was going through, but he wouldn't listen. Her own family lived too far away to help, and she'd always put others before herself. I hugged Jessica tightly and whispered, "From now on, it's okay to put yourself first, Jessica. If you need help, don't hesitate to ask. I'm sorry I didn't realize sooner." I gently stroked her head, and she whispered back, "Mom, thank you," before breaking down into childlike sobs. In the days that followed, Jessica's emotional state seemed to worsen as her due date neared. When I came home from work, I found the house spotless. Despite my insistence that she rest, Jessica kept doing chores. She'd even try to move heavy things or fix broken light bulbs. Sometimes she'd pack her bags, scared of facing her husband's anger. I thought she might need professional help, so I reached out to our neighbor, Lisa, who used to be a therapist, and asked for a recommendation for a counseling clinic. "Lisa, hi, you have a moment? I need to talk about my daughter," I said as she welcomed me into her home. I shared Jessica's situation with her and her husband, Kevin, and they recommended a good clinic. Jessica had been feeling unwell, so she started going to the hospital. Lisa and Kevin were worried about her, so when I was at work, Lisa would check in on her. Thankfully, Jessica started to feel better and smile more like she used to. When Jessica's due date arrived, I took her to the hospital as her contractions started. I stayed by her side, rubbing her back and wiping her sweat, cheering her on. When it was time for her to go into the delivery room, I waited anxiously until I heard the baby cry. A nurse told me that both Jessica and the baby were healthy, which was a huge relief. When I went to see them, Jessica was holding our sleeping baby in her arms. Despite my anger towards Thomas, I still let him know that our baby girl was born healthy. When he entered the hospital room and saw the baby, he made hurtful comments. "Yuck. Babies look like monkeys, not cute at all. Jessica, you're not even wearing makeup and just lying in bed. You're so lazy. Put some effort into how you look. You're a woman." The nurses and doctors who heard him were furious. They surrounded Thomas, yelling at him for not being supportive. But Thomas just got more irritated and snapped back, "Shut up. My mom was working even right after giving birth. This is clearly laziness. I've never heard of a woman going back to work right after having a baby, and it's unlikely Thomas's mom did that. Something must have twisted his memory. He's never shown any interest in pregnancy or childbirth, so it's no surprise he doesn't understand." Thomas stormed out and didn't even bother showing up on Jessica's discharge day. There were no signs of him coming to pick her up. Concerned about sending Jessica back to Thomas, I offered for her to stay with me. But Jessica insisted on going home, saying it wouldn't be fair for the baby to grow up without a father. Reluctantly, I called Thomas to see if he would come get them. His response was dismissive, saying he was too busy with work and didn't want to deal with a crying baby. Then he hung up. I brought Jessica and the baby home, suggesting she stay with me until she got the hang of parenting. Thomas hadn't bothered to buy any baby supplies, so we went shopping together to make sure they had everything they needed. He hadn't even thought of a name for the baby because work was all he cared about, so Jessica and I chose one together. We named her Sarah. Our neighbors, Lisa and her husband, knew about the situation and helped out with looking after Sarah. With their support, Sarah grew up well. About 3 months after Sarah's birth, Thomas suddenly showed up unannounced to take Jessica and Sarah back. "Hey, I'm here to pick you up. Hurry up, you're always so slow," Thomas yelled from the front door. But Jessica had reached a point where she fully understood how terrible Thomas was and had decided to divorce him. She refused to be controlled by him anymore. "I'm not coming back home. I'll send you the divorce papers," she replied firmly from behind the door. Thomas couldn't believe it. "Are you kidding me? In today's world, a man with a wife and kids is more likely to succeed. What's the point of being married to you if we divorce?" "I'm never getting divorced," he yelled back. My daughter was furious, realizing that Thomas had only married her and had a child for the sake of his career. Before I could say anything, our neighbors, Lisa and her husband Kevin, came out of their house. Thomas went pale when he saw Kevin, who turned out to be his boss. "Boss, what are you doing here?" Thomas stammered as Lisa and Kevin approached. Kevin, clearly disappointed, said, "So, you're Jessica's husband. It's unbelievable that someone like you, who neglected his child for 3 months, turns out to be you. You lack empathy, and I can't trust my team with someone like you. I'll inform the CEO, and your promotion is canceled." Thomas pleaded with Kevin, but Kevin was unmoved. "You don't even want to listen. You only ever cared about your work," Thomas cried, clinging to Kevin in desperation. Kevin didn't allow Thomas to say anything more. Thomas, feeling defeated, dropped to his knees. Kevin, known as a family man both in the neighborhood and at work, couldn't stand to see Thomas treating his family so poorly. It turned out that Thomas had been pretending to be a good husband and father at work to boost his chances of promotion. Quietly, Thomas went home that day, but at the office, he started pestering his colleagues and subordinates, asking them to put in a good word for him with the boss for a promotion. When no one complied, he went straight to the CEO. "Sir, I've worked hard for this company every day. My sales numbers are consistently high. Please approve my promotion," he pleaded with the CEO. But the CEO had already heard from Kevin. "Your performance numbers might look good, but you've been using aggressive tactics to win contracts," the CEO said. "Just raising your own numbers isn't enough. A deal that tarnishes the company's image is a failure, even if it's successful. If you can't understand that, you won't move up. I have no more expectations for you." Thomas left the CEO's office looking defeated. The CEO, who occasionally appears on TV and is known for his integrity, made his decision based on more than just reports from Thomas's boss. It was a clear message to Thomas. He lost his motivation for work, started making more mistakes, and was eventually transferred to a regional department with very little work. At least he didn't lose his job entirely. After his transfer, Thomas kept coming to our house, begging for another chance and wanting to see Sarah. Both Jessica and I ignored him, but when he became too persistent, Kevin warned him that he would report him to the CEO, which could get him fired. After that, Thomas stopped bothering us. It became clear that his affection was shallow. When Kevin found out that Jessica was struggling to get her divorce approved, he referred her to a top-notch attorney. The divorce went through smoothly, and she even received compensation for emotional distress. Meanwhile, Thomas was transferred and seemed to be living a quiet, lonely life in a rural area. I heard this from Kevin. Kevin mentioned that the last time Thomas came into the office, he looked completely different. His shirt and suit were wrinkled, he had grown a beard, and he had lost a lot of weight. In the small town where Thomas moved, it's not easy to get to a dry cleaner or convenience store without a car. Maybe he's trying to save on gas or simply can't be bothered. But if he's not using these services, he'll have to take care of himself. Since Thomas never lifted a finger to help with housework and always said it was a woman's job, he probably doesn't know how to do anything for himself. He must regret treating Jessica like a servant now that he's all alone. Perhaps Thomas feels like he's lost everything since the divorce and losing custody. He even started to forget the child support payments he promised to make for Sarah. Whenever Jessica reminds him, he apparently tells her how tough his life is, almost in tears. I advised Jessica to inform her lawyer, and as soon as she requested child support through legal channels, it got paid. So far, we haven't heard anything from Thomas about wanting to see Sarah. If Sarah wants to, we'll reach out. But Jessica and I agreed that we'll pour lots of love into raising her into a fine adult even without a father around. Just leave. Go away. The person yelled angrily. Stand still outside, you silly, useless old lady. I'm feeling really cold. Can you please open the door? The next morning, my son's wife was found outside, feeling very cold. My name is Lucy. I'm 60 years old and I take care of the house. My husband died a few years ago. Now my son Tom, his wife Mary, and my grandson Alan live with me. We came together after my husband passed away, but I tried to give them space so I wouldn't bother them. They thought it would be too much if we were too close all the time, so they made changes to the house for more privacy. Mary is friendly and likes to spend time with her friends. Maybe it was better for us to not see each other often. Alan, my grandson, is in 4th grade. Sometimes I look after him when Mary goes out. He's really cute. Tom works at night, so we don't see each other much. He and Mary never argued, and they went out together sometimes. So I thought everything was fine with their marriage. Mary has lots of friends and throws parties at our house often. She stays close with her mom friends from Alex's school, and they all come over on Fridays for a party. These parties bothered me a lot. They started in the evening and went late into the night with loud noise and people drinking. Sometimes the husbands of Mary's friends would get drunk too. They didn't care if Alan got tired or hungry, so he'd often come to my room when he was bored. Once someone got hurt and an ambulance had to come because they fell into broken glass. Another time, a fight got so bad that they almost called the police. It was always me who had to calm Alan down and say sorry to the neighbors the next day for the trouble. Mary liked having these parties and didn't want them to stop. I thought about talking to Tom about it, but since he worked at night on Fridays, he never saw what was happening, and I didn't feel comfortable bringing it up with him. I once told Mary how worried I was about Alan. I'm concerned about all the chaos on Fridays. I don't want any emergencies. It's not good for Alan. I'll take care of him on Fridays, so why don't you all go out to a restaurant and drink responsibly? Living together stresses me out more than you realize. Wouldn't you feel the same if you were me? Also, going out to drink costs more money than doing it at home. I can't tell your friends they can't come here. You don't understand how I feel. She got really mad and wouldn't talk to anyone. Then one Friday, Alan came home from school feeling tired. He had a fever of 100 degrees when I checked. Of all days, it's Friday. Everyone will be here soon. Why don't you go to your room and rest so you don't bother us? Can't we just cancel for today? I didn't say everything I wanted to. I can take care of Alan today, Mary. Is that okay? I offered, but she declined, probably sensing my frustration. It's fine, she replied. You don't need to worry. We're not that noisy. Why does it always fall on moms when a kid gets sick? I didn't mean to blame her, but I had to say something. If you start feeling worse, come to my room, I told Alan. I have some TV shows we can watch tonight. I'll be up late. Thanks, Grandma, he said. I'll be okay. I started to feel a bit calmer, but it was still a big day. The noise from their gathering was loud even from my room. Then there was a soft knock on my door. My heart raced with worry about Alan. I hurried to open the door, and there he was, looking upset. Can I stay with you tonight? He asked, tears in his eyes. I can't sleep because my head hurts. Even when I cover my ears, it's still so noisy. I quickly brought him into the room and gave him a drink, which he drank in one go, probably because he was thirsty. His hands felt really warm. So I checked his temperature, and it had gone up to 102. I was furious for the first time in a while. But I held back because taking care of Alan was more important than arguing with Mary. Alan still had a fever the next morning and looked just as sick. Alan looks really sick, so I think we should take him to the hospital this morning, I suggested, because most hospitals only see patients in the morning on Saturdays. But Mary couldn't get out of bed, probably because she had been up late drinking the night before. "Don't worry, it'll get better soon. You'll be fine, right?" she said, still half asleep and not even looking up from her bed. Alan replied, but it was clear he wasn't okay. He's had asthma since he was little, so he's more likely to have asthma attacks when he's sick. As I watched him, worried he might have an attack, he started to wheeze, just like I had feared. "Mary, I think Alan's having an asthma attack. Where's his medicine?" I asked, but Mary was fast asleep and didn't respond. "Okay, I'm taking him to the emergency room, all right?" I repeated several times before I took Alan to the hospital. Thankfully, they were able to give him inhalation and medication, and I felt a huge relief seeing Alan feeling better. When Mary woke up that evening, she exploded. "Don't be selfish. He didn't need to go to the hospital. How much did going to the emergency room cost you?" "I can't believe it. I tried to talk to you so many times, but you were too drunk to wake up. Can't you just stop drinking when Alan is sick? He was in a lot of pain. Fever is normal for kids, and it's already gone, so it wasn't a big deal. Asthma flare-ups happen too. Don't spoil him just because he's your grandson." I thought I should tell Tom about it, so I did, but he said, "But Alan is okay now, right? Don't worry too much about a kid's cold. Mary's dealing with a lot of stress from our living situation, so please try to be patient with her. It's important for you to take a step back since you all live together." I got the message loud and clear, but I didn't have much to say in response to his comments about the stress of living together. Tom was at work one day towards the end of the year when he suddenly needed surgery. He ended up spending a week in the hospital, including over the holidays. I'm thinking about spending this New Year's holiday at my parents' house for the first time in a while, Mary mentioned one day. Usually, our family spent New Year's cleaning up, enjoying our favorite foods, and going out to eat with my eldest daughter Emily and her family, who lived nearby. I knew there was some distance between Mary and her parents, so I wondered what had changed. But if she could feel refreshed at her parents' place, that would be great for me. And I knew it would make Alan happy to spend time with his loving relatives. That sounds wonderful. Are you going to bring Alan with you? I'm sure your parents would be thrilled to see him. I'll bring him along while I'm there. Can you keep an eye on Tom? Of course. Aside from checking on Tom, I'll be spending New Year's alone this year. If you're going to be alone for the holidays, why don't you come to our house this year? Emily suggested. So I decided to accept her invitation. On New Year's Eve, both Mary and I were supposed to leave the house. I found myself sweating as I cleaned that day. Maybe it was because I was getting older, but cleaning felt like a task I had been avoiding for too long. Mary was out in the morning doing some shopping, so I tried to do as much cleaning as I could by myself. When Mary returned from shopping, she seemed a bit restless, fiddling with her watch. "Lucy, when are you planning to leave?" she asked. "Aren't you done yet?" "Well, I'm not sure. I haven't really set a time. I've done quite a bit, but I might not finish everything now. What about you? When are you planning to leave?" "If you go first, I'll make sure all the doors are locked and everything before I leave." I was sweating a lot from all the cleaning and had only thin clothes on. So when I got thrown out into the yard, I felt really cold and shivery, especially with the snow falling. "Mary, let me back in. I haven't had a chance to change my clothes. I'm freezing out here. Why are you taking so long? Just go already." My coat had been thrown out with my belongings, so I put it over my sweaty t-shirt for some extra warmth. I couldn't get back into the house because both the front door and the kitchen door were locked. I called out to Mary for a while, but she didn't answer, so I gave up. With no other choice, I decided to take a train to Emily's house. When I arrived, Emily was surprised to see me in such light clothes. "What's wrong? Why are you dressed like that?" she asked with concern. "Come inside quickly. You'll catch a cold. Have you seen Bob? He was worried about you because of the snow, so he went to pick you up. He said he texted you." It was only then that I realized I had left my phone at home. Emily's son, Bob, is a college student, and I felt bad because he had driven all the way there to pick me up, and we missed each other. Emily texted Bob to let him know that I had arrived by train. That's when Bob shared something shocking with us. "I tried calling you several times, but you never answered. Then I heard a phone ringing from inside the house. I thought you might be sick, so I went in. Strangely, the front door was unlocked. I found your phone in the living room, but when I heard noises from upstairs, I got worried and went to check it out. It makes sense for Bob to be concerned, especially with the unlocked door, I commented. Then I saw Mary and some man I didn't know hovering in the bedroom, Bob added. What? But Mary was supposed to be at her parents' house with Ellen, I exclaimed, surprised by the unexpected revelation. I was stunned and stood still for a moment. Suddenly, they leaped off the balcony and disappeared into the yard, covered in a comforter. I ran after them and searched the yard, but they were gone. They had escaped. You let them get away? Emily asked incredulously. I don't think they got hurt. There were bushes and snow on the ground, I explained. I locked the second floor door and was about to leave when I heard a noise from the next room and found Alan. Alan was small enough to hide behind Bob, Emily remarked. I'm sorry, my mom told me not to leave my room until after the new year. Alan was in his room surrounded by snacks and juice. I brought Alan here because I thought he'd have more fun and be more comfortable, Mary explained. I made sure to lock the front door. The spare key is under the flower pot. I'm glad nothing has changed since I was a kid. You did a good job of locking the door, Mom. It's time to talk to Tom about the future. Let's play some games, Alan. The two happily left the room. I'm not interested in Mary's affair right now. They can work it out on their own, but I can't forget what she did to Alan, I muttered. We spent the night relaxing with Emily and the others because it was already late. The next morning, Emily, Bob, and I returned home. We decided to leave Alan with Emily's husband. When we arrived home, we saw Mary standing at the front door. She was barefoot, trembling, and wrapped in a comforter. Aha, there you are. You locked me out, she exclaimed. Mary shivered in the cold, her teeth chattering as we went into the house to warm up. At that moment, I couldn't even bring myself to speak to her. But eventually, once Mary had stopped shivering, I decided to break the silence. I heard from Bob. Who were you with on the second floor? I asked. What are you talking about? You must have the wrong idea, Mary replied defensively. And Bob, what were you doing breaking into someone's house? Why didn't you use the intercom? I added. I noticed a pair of men's shoes near the entrance. But are those Tom's? Let me go ask him, I said. Well, there was actually a burglar in the house, Mary admitted hesitantly. I was about to explode with anger when something surprising happened. It was a close call. That's serious. I think we should call the police, Emily suggested, pulling out her phone. Wait, I see what you're trying to do. All right, you caught me. So who is that man? I demanded. Mary hung her head in silence. Weren't you two together when you jumped off the balcony? What happened to him? Where is he? I pressed further. He left a while ago, Mary replied quietly. She seemed shocked to be abandoned by the man she was having an affair with. She had spent the whole night barefoot, wrapped in a comforter, while he had gone home. Oh, so he left you? That's unfortunate. Bob's words struck a nerve, and Mary's face flushed with embarrassment. How could you neglect Alan like that? Were you planning to lock him in the room while you had your fun? I'm not interested in your affair, but I can't forgive you for what you did to Alan. I expressed my anger. I agree with her. At his age, he can manage on his own just fine. I'm his mother, but that doesn't mean I have to prioritize him over everything else in my life. I have my own things to do. Just because he's my son doesn't mean he can interfere. Mary defended herself, shocking Emily, Bob, and me with her callousness. Tom will be coming home from the hospital soon. Alan and I were supposed to stay at Emily's house until then. But when the time came for Tom to be released, we decided to have the discussion at our house. However, I didn't want Alan to be there in case Mary said something hurtful to him. So I let him have some fun with Bob, I explained. When Tom arrived, Emily laid out the facts plainly. Mary, is this true? Tom asked, clearly shocked. Well, you were busy with work and I was lonely. I'm sorry, Mary admitted, her voice shaking. Mary, did you really lock my mom out of the house in the snow? Tom asked, seeking clarification. No, that's not what happened. And what about locking Alan in the room while you were having an affair? I interjected, unable to contain my anger. Tom, didn't Mom tell you about the Friday night parties? Why didn't you and Mary talk about it? Alan spoke up, surprising us all with his maturity. I'm not sure how to approach it, but the important thing is to never hesitate to ask for help. I've been exhausted from work too, and it's been tough. And I'm sure Mary has her own issues living with mom. You two seem to avoid facing problems and take the easy way out. Have you ever thought about others? You need to talk it out and figure out what you're going to do together. You're both adults. But remember, you have to consider Alan. I won't let you abandon him, Tom addressed the situation calmly. A few days later, they decided to get divorced. Mary was ordered to pay child support and alimony to Tom, who got custody of Alan. Mary confessed everything, and the divorce proceeded smoothly. We never found out who she was cheating with. Mary refused to talk about it, and Tom was too focused on building a new life for himself and Alan to dwell on it. But 3 months later, the other man's family found out about the affair, and we learned his identity. To my surprise, the other man was married to one of Mary's mom friends. He was one of the men who sometimes attended the Friday night parties. He and Mary continued their relationship even after she divorced Tom. The reason Mary agreed to the divorce so easily was that she didn't want anything about the parties to be revealed. I can't understand how she could stay with someone who left her out in the cold like that, I mused. Despite having to pay child support and alimony, Mary stayed with him. The other man's wife demanded alimony and that Mary cut ties with him. As I pondered, I couldn't shake off the thought of the unlocked front door that day. They had been so preoccupied with their affair that they forgot to lock it. If it had been locked, Bob would have definitely used the intercom. I told Bob that even if the door was unlocked and he suspected there was a burglar, he shouldn't have gone in because he could have been in danger. I was worried about Grandma, Alan explained. Those two would have been in for a surprise if a cop had shown up out of nowhere and caught them cheating. I'm not experienced enough, Bob admitted. Well, you know, he can be a bit of a goofball, but he always tries to lighten the mood and treats Alan like his own brother, Emily explained, acknowledging Bob's loyalty. Mary had a wide circle of friends, and news of the affair spread quickly among them. Eventually, she left the area, probably finding it too difficult to stay in the same city. It seemed that her group of friends gave them a hard time until they decided to move. They're trying to make ends meet in their new place. They have to support Alan, pay alimony to Tom, and also pay alimony to his ex-wife. Mary's relationship with her parents is strained, and she's working tirelessly with no support, I explained. She called our house once. I'm so sorry, she said. I'm lonely and I'm struggling because I have no one to turn to. Please forgive me. Please help me. It's one thing to want to see or talk to Alan, but it's another to try to avoid taking responsibility for what she did, I thought bitterly. The children of Mary's friends gave Alan a hard time for a while because of Mary's actions. Tom managed to talk to their parents and the kids, and they were able to resolve things among themselves. But I can't help but wonder how much it hurt Alan to have his mother disappear and then be bullied by his own friends, I said sadly. I thought about telling Mary how much Alan is struggling, but I doubt she would care, I admitted. Is that all you wanted to say? Emily asked. Don't contact me, I replied firmly before hanging up the phone. I've moved in with Tom and Alan. There have been challenges, and there will be more to come, but we'll face them together. Tom has also cut back on his work hours to spend more time with Alan. I'm grateful to Emily and her family for all their support during this time, I concluded gratefully. Emily said many things I should have said. Bob cares deeply for Alan, and they've become like brothers. I hope Alan will be raised in a loving family. I'm glad I get to be here to see him grow up, I added with a hint of hope for the future. Seven people should be fine. The child can sit separately. My mother-in-law Jane's words rang out clearly and without hesitation. Her constant torment had reached its peak, but today was the day I planned to confront it all. At this family gathering, I intended to reveal a hidden truth that had been simmering beneath the surface. I'm Nancy, a 28-year-old chef. After graduating from culinary school, I began working at a renowned Western-style restaurant where I met my husband, Mike. He was a regular customer at the restaurant, hailing from a family with a long-standing legacy in the electronics industry. Following his father's passing last year, Mike took over the family business. My own family is fairly ordinary, except for one notable detail. My parents and even my older brother are all chefs. Growing up, every meal at home was a special event. fueling my passion for cooking. I'm proud to say I graduated at the top of my class thanks to my family's support and background. Generally, I'm a calm person, but I take great pride in my culinary skills. However, everything changed after marriage. When Mike and I decided to marry, I knew I would be moving into this family home. While I was prepared for the transition, I didn't anticipate it happening so quickly. In retrospect, I wish we had discussed it more thoroughly. Initially, Jane welcomed me with unexpected warmth. She was incredibly attentive, bringing treats and offering to handle household chores. Naturally, her home-cooked meals became a staple at our dining table. But there was a catch. Her cooking was vastly different from what I was used to. Jane, coming from the northern part of the country, preferred much stronger flavors. Her seasoning was so intense that it was hard to distinguish the ingredients in her dishes. A bite often felt like wading through a sea of salt. Jane would cheerfully say, "You need it this strong to make the rice more appetizing," and would encourage me to have seconds. Internally, I found it overwhelming, though Mike, sitting next to me, seemed to think the food was just a bit bland. I was stunned when Jane mentioned that she had toned down the flavors for my benefit. Each day, my sense of taste seemed to dull, which affected my confidence in seasoning dishes at work. Thankfully, the head chef, who always inspects my dishes, hadn't raised any concerns, but I felt compelled to act. I began waking up earlier to prepare breakfast to my taste, which helped restore some of my confidence in seasoning. However, Jane noticed my efforts and started growing distant. Her behavior changed subtly at first, ignoring my greetings more frequently and making sharp comments about my cooking. "Isn't the dinner tonight a bit bland?" she asked. I reassured her. I believe I seasoned it properly. Despite my attempts to adapt, it seemed Jane's disapproval was only growing. I took a bite and knew instantly that it wasn't bland. The seasoning felt lacking, almost tasteless. "Doesn't it bother you?" Jane asked, her voice laced with disapproval. "I think for health reasons, it's better not to make it too rich. Enjoying delicious food is important, but preparing meals at home isn't your job. You should adjust to our preferences." No matter what I said, Jane always had a counter-argument. Then, with a dismissive gesture, she drenched the dish I had put so much effort into with soy sauce. I was confused and hurt. I was trying to be considerate of the family's health with lighter seasoning, yet this was the result. I felt lost, and my mind drifted back to an earlier event, my niece Jessica's 5th birthday party, held at my sister-in-law Kathy's home. Kathy has 2 older sisters who are incredibly warm and supportive. From the start, they assured me they'd be there for me if I ever needed anything. Their husbands were equally kind and approachable. At the party, I helped with the cooking as Jane had asked. The table was filled with a variety of dishes, clearly distinguished by their origins. My dishes were Western style, while Jane's were traditional Japanese, leading to a stark contrast in ambience and seasoning. The party began on a high note. Jessica, who adores the omurice from NY's restaurant, was thrilled to have it at home. Kathy, with a cheerful smile, said, "I often make that omurice myself." Jessica, brimming with enthusiasm, declared, "I love omurice. NY's is the best." Her excitement brightened the mood instantly. However, Jane seemed slightly out of place. She pushed her own dish, saying, "Come on, try this. It's Grandma's special stew." Jessica hesitated, noting, "It's a bit too salty for me." After tasting the stew, Kathy's husband grimaced and asked, "Could you tone down the salt next time? Can I have some more water, please?" The atmosphere grew awkward as Kathy's comment hung in the air. "Mom, don't you think your dish is a bit too rich today? Maybe you could cook with Nancy and pick up some seasoning tips from her," Kathy said with a laugh. Though she might have been joking, Jane's face flushed with anger. Without a word, she snapped and retreated from the room. I felt overwhelmed and speechless. Despite my best efforts to help with the cooking, it seemed like I had inadvertently made things worse. The tension lingered, and eventually, everyone decided to leave early. It was disheartening to have my heartfelt efforts criticized. That night, I apologized to Jane, but her response was sharp. "You're just living here, and yet you're so presumptuous." I was hurt, but I tried to understand her feelings and be patient. However, the next day, it became clear that her attitude towards me had shifted. She began adding excessive seasoning to the breakfast I prepared, often grimacing as she did. Sometimes, she would throw the food away without even tasting it. When I sought support from Mike, he dismissed my concerns with comments like, "Aren't you being a bit stubborn?" or "You're probably just overreacting." His responses made me feel distant, as if the issue was not his concern. Despite being newlyweds, he started coming home late and avoided family events. The growing distance between us made me question if I could continue living like this. I'd even considered divorce, but the thought of explaining the situation to our parents and relatives was daunting. Things took a turn for the worse when Jane fell down the stairs and injured her foot. Kathy promptly offered to help with daily chores, but Jane insisted that I take over. She began assigning me a multitude of errands and even called me during work hours. The constant early departures from work led to concerned glances and complaints from my colleagues, ultimately forcing me to resign. When Jane learned of my resignation, she remarked with a sense of superiority, "It's a pity, considering how much you love that job." The days that followed were incredibly tough. I was on call for Jane day and night, leaving me with little time for myself. Even when I asked Mike for help, he consistently made implausible excuses, claiming he was too busy or staying overnight at the company. I felt I could no longer stay in this house, but I didn't want to leave without making a statement. One clear morning, as the three of us sat at the table, I mustered the courage to say, "I'm considering a divorce." Mike and Jane were stunned. "Why all of a sudden?" Mike asked, wide-eyed. "We've just gotten married. Did I do something wrong? Aren't you misunderstanding something?" Jane, with a disgruntled expression, added, "Asking for a divorce without any reason is childish." Their reactions made me feel belittled, but my resolve was unshakable. "I'm not misunderstanding anything," I replied firmly. "Mike is constantly away, and Jane seems to take pleasure in tormenting me. Why would I want to stay in such an environment? I'm going to get a divorce. My decision is final." My declaration took them by surprise. "I'm sorry, I'll come home earlier from now on," Mike said, his face showing some displeasure. "If you want, you can go back to your parents' home for a while. But considering my mother's leg, could you stay here a bit longer?" Mike's suggestion carried an undertone of frustration. I acknowledged his offer but replied simply, "Understood." At that moment, I noticed the smirks on their faces, like mother, like son. For a short period, Jane's antagonistic behavior diminished and Mike genuinely tried to come home earlier. However, this brief period of peace didn't last long. Mike's overtime work increased and Jane's ill temper resurfaced. Despite her supposedly injured foot, she frequently ventured out. As I pondered their behavior, I was on the verge of uncovering an unbelievable truth. A few days later, my cell phone rang continuously with calls from Jane and Mike. Mike's voice was filled with anger. "Where are you? How could you just leave my mother alone like that? You were the one who said I could go back to my parents' home," I coldly retorted, "but my mother's foot still isn't healed." Mike continued with seemingly trivial excuses, and in the background, I could hear Jane's irritated voice. "From now on, let's discuss matters through a lawyer," I said with a heavy sigh before hanging up. Back at my parents' house, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension as I began to prepare for the next steps. I spent my days feeling rejuvenated at my parents' home. The warmth and familiarity there helped heal my emotional wounds. The time I spent with them felt truly fulfilling, especially when my mother prepared my favorite dishes. Her love was palpable, and as I helped with the cooking, I felt the deep bond of family once more. When my mother praised the dish I made, saying it was delicious, tears welled up in my eyes. In the midst of this comforting routine, my phone rang unexpectedly. To my surprise, it was Jane. She apologized for everything she had done in the past and invited me to her birthday party, which was to be held at a renowned upscale restaurant in town. Despite my mixed feelings, I saw it as a chance to bridge gaps and decided to attend. Jane seemed satisfied as she informed me of the party details, including the time. On the day of the event, Mike and Jane were already waiting outside the restaurant. When they spotted me, both greeted me with smug smiles. The attendees were the same as the previous party. My two sisters-in-law, Kathy and Meg, their husbands, my niece Jessica, Mike, and Jane, 8 people in total. Before everyone arrived, Mike and Jane instructed me not to mention our divorce to the family until after dinner. When Kathy, Meg, and their families showed up, Kathy greeted me warmly. "Nancy, it's been a while. You seem to have lost a bit of weight. Are you doing okay?" Once everyone was gathered, we approached the restaurant. A staff member greeted us and said, "Your reservation is for 7 people under the name of Jane, correct?" I was sure we had 8, but Jane interjected, "Yes, 7 is correct. Nancy can sit at a different table." As I looked around, I saw the surprised expressions on the faces of my sisters-in-law and their husbands, while Mike and Jane wore satisfied smirks. It became clear to me that this was their plan. How childish could they be? "Nancy, you've prepared a special surprise, haven't you?" Jane taunted with a smirk. Who makes themselves the center of attention with a surprise at their own birthday party? Only someone like Jane, I thought. Well, if that's how she wants it. I quickly came up with a delightful surprise. "Nancy, do you really have something planned? Even if you don't feel too much pressure," Kathy said with concern. I whispered back, "Yes, I do have something in mind, but Jane's behavior is making it difficult." Excusing myself, I asked the staff if any seats were available. They kindly offered me a spot that was out of Jane and Mike's line of sight. As the group enjoyed their meal, a special children's menu was served for Jessica, who excitedly declared, "This tastes just like the owner from Ometers." Kathy praised the dishes, and Jane boasted, "Ever since this restaurant got a new chef, the flavors have improved significantly. The meat dish coming out next is supposed to be outstanding." Mike nodded in agreement, and soon the much-anticipated meat dish began to be served to Kathy, Meg, and their families. For some reason, Jane and Mike's table was overlooked. Jane, clearly agitated, called out to a waiter with a raised voice, "Please wait a moment, we will serve it shortly." The waiter replied, I watched with some amusement before heading to the kitchen to prepare. A few minutes later, I emerged wearing a chef's apron and announced, "Sorry for the wait." Jane and Mike stared at me in disbelief. "Could it be that you made the dish?" Kathy asked, her voice filled with surprise and delight. Jane and Mike were left speechless as I cheerfully placed the dishes in front of them. I even gave them a playful wink and said, "Enjoy." Feeling mischievous, I presented Jane with a special dish drenched in soy sauce and gleaming darkly on the plate. For the final touch, I poured even more soy sauce over it, leaving Jane stunned into silence. I then set a unique dish in front of Mike, saying, "I hope this energizes you like a battery." I placed several actual batteries on Mike's plate with a smirk. My niece burst into laughter at the sight, while Kathy, Meg, and their husbands looked on with a mix of shock and concern. "What kind of service is this? Where's the manager?" Mike demanded. "You won't get away with this." Just then, the restaurant's manager approached, maintaining a calm demeanor. "Is there an issue here?" he asked. "You think you can just do this to us without consequences?" Mike challenged. The manager replied, "Given the disruption to our business, we are considering pressing charges against you." Jane and Mike were left speechless by the turn of events. It turned out Jane and Mike had been frequent visitors, often causing trouble. They had a reputation for complaining about the food and disturbing other patrons. Although their behavior had been overlooked before because they were related to me, the manager made it clear that this would no longer be tolerated. "Since they're related to my family, we've been lenient, but we won't hesitate to take action now," the manager said, addressing me. "Is that all right with you, Nancy?" "Of course," I replied. Jane and Mike stared in astonishment. It turned out my brother Jason had recently become the owner of the restaurant. He had been in France and couldn't attend my wedding, so while Jane and Mike knew about him, they had never met him. Jason, however, recognized them from the photos I had sent of my husband's family. "I'm sorry," Jason said, addressing Jane and Mike with a firm but polite tone. "I wasn't able to celebrate with you at the wedding," I began. "I wanted to approach you several times, but you always seemed to be with someone else." Jane and Mike looked at me with sheer disbelief. Sensing that this conversation might take a while, Kathy and Meg suggested to their husbands that they head home first. After seeing them off, they turned back to us, their smiles masking serious expressions. "Can we hear the details?" Kathy asked, her gaze intense. I was taken aback by Kathy and Meg's seriousness, a side of them I hadn't seen before. Mike attempted to explain. "Well, it was a meeting with colleagues from the industry. This restaurant is quite popular, so we decided to try it out." Just then, a staff member approached Mike, handing him a pair of earrings. "You left these behind during your last visit," the staff member said. Kathy raised an eyebrow and teased, "Were you dining with men who wear these?" I chuckled and replied, "It's not like that, Kathy. Mike has been having an affair with a woman who works at a nearby flower shop." Mike's face turned pale. "How did you find out?" he asked, shocked. "I hired a detective some time ago," I explained. My suspicions were confirmed. They frequently met at this restaurant, which was their favorite spot. I even have photographic evidence of their meetings. Mike, no longer trying to hide his affair, said, "I truly love her. Marrying you was a mistake. I'm ready for a divorce." His response was a relief to me as I had been considering divorce myself. "Fine, but make sure to pay the alimony," I replied. "No problem," Mike said confidently. "I recently landed a big business deal, so money isn't a concern." "That's good to hear," I said. Turning to Jane, who had remained quiet until now, I added, "And as for you, Jane, until recently you had been seeing someone for about 5 years, but your husband only passed away a year ago, right?" Jane's agitation was clear. Kathy and Meg, visibly injured, glared at their mother. They had been closer to their father and were likely upset by this revelation. What surprised me was that the detective knew so much about Jane because my father-in-law had hired him as well. I couldn't help but chuckle at the coincidence. "Did you really deceive our father for so long? And Mike, how could you betray such a lovely woman like Nancy?" Kathy and Meg exclaimed, their eyes filled with a mix of sadness, surprise, and anger. The growing awareness of other customers around us made it clear that continuing this conversation was becoming difficult. We proposed reconvening on another date in a more private setting as I left the restaurant. I shared smiles with Jason and the other staff members, savoring a moment of joy and accomplishment. My brother later told me that many regular patrons were at the restaurant that day, and after the troublesome guests were evicted, the staff received applause from the other diners. Jason had only booked a table for 7 in advance, making our plan a flawless success. As a result, Mike and Jane would no longer be welcome at my brother's restaurant. A few days later, we held a private family meeting where, in front of Kathy and Meg, Mike and I signed our divorce papers. Mike coldly declared, "I don't care what happens from here on out." Jane lamented, "I can't believe such a troublesome Nancy was my son's wife, especially when I'm supposedly unable to walk." To cut off her endless complaints, I snapped, "Jane, watch your feet." To my surprise, Jane, who had claimed difficulty walking, leaped up, revealing that her leg had fully recovered. Her so-called pain was a mere act of retaliation against me. Her frequent outings despite her alleged pain had raised my suspicions, and it was clear she was deceitful to the end. But now she was someone I had no time for. Thus my short-lived marriage ended without regrets. The alimony was deposited into my account as promised. Whether Mike had to pay his mistress or not was irrelevant to me. In the aftermath, despite the hefty alimony that plunged him into debt, Mike reportedly broke up with his mistress shortly after our divorce. Kathy later told me that the woman was notorious in the local community for causing trouble with married men. Moreover, the significant business deal Mike had boasted about also fell through. His reputation suffered greatly after the commotion at Jason's restaurant, and word of the incident spread to his business associates. Given the importance of trust in their industry, the impending contract was soon rescinded. It was all a consequence of his own actions, and his professional future looked bleak. As for Jane, she was also abandoned by her male companion. After seeking medical attention for health concerns, she discovered that her excessive salt intake was the cause of her problems, and maintaining good health would now be a challenge for her. Her dietary habits over the years have led to this unfortunate outcome. I returned to work at the Western-style restaurant I had previously resigned from. Despite the trouble I had caused, my former colleagues welcomed me back warmly. Kathy, Meg, and my niece Jessica occasionally came to dine, cheering me on. They had completely cut ties with Mike and Jane, unable to forgive their actions, especially given their respect for my late father-in-law and their desire to protect me. Despite the ups and downs, I have reclaimed some of the most enjoyable and valuable moments of my life as a chef. I'm now leading a truly fulfilling life. "Pops is gone, huh? You're off to some facility starting tomorrow," my son declared coldly, as I sat there, still reeling from the grief of losing my husband. There wasn't even a hint of sorrow on his face for his father's death, just an unpleasant smirk. "But don't worry, we'll make sure to properly inherit all of Dad's estate and the house." I was stunned. After not seeing him for so long, this was the first thing out of his mouth. His wife, standing beside him, seemed completely on board with inheriting everything too. They barely visited before, but now they show up just for this. There's no way I'd let them inherit anything. I'm Holly, married for 40 years. My husband and I had always talked about saving for retirement. "We'll need about $1.3 million to retire comfortably," he'd say, and I'd agree. We'd worked hard and had some savings, enough that we wouldn't struggle immediately. But the worries never stopped. "We do have a son, Kevin," but we haven't seen him in nearly 10 years. Who knows what he's doing now? We'd love to rely on him, but we can't depend on an absent son, especially with potential care needs in the future. Despite our worries, we managed to get by on our own, until one weekday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I thought it was a delivery, but when I checked the monitor, it was Kevin. He looked different from the last time I saw him, rougher, almost unrecognizable. "Hey, it's Kevin," I exclaimed, surprised, as my husband looked just as shocked. "Kevin? Really?" I rushed to open the door, and there he stood with an unfamiliar, flashy woman by his side. Who is this woman? I wondered, my mind racing with questions. Kevin, unfazed, stepped in and called the woman over. "What's going on? What's this all about?" I asked, confused. "Well, I'm getting married to her," Kevin announced casually. After being absent for so long, he dropped one surprise after another, leaving my husband and me speechless. The woman, who introduced herself as Sophie, spoke up. "Nice to meet you, I'm Sophie." Just like that, it seemed they were ready to leave after a brief greeting. "Wait, after so long, can't we talk a bit more?" I asked, not wanting to hold them for long but hoping to chat more with my son and his fiancée. "Please take good care of Kevin," I added, trying to be polite. But Sophie's response was cold and firm. "I'm going to marry Kevin, but I have no intention of becoming part of your family." My husband and I were dumbfounded, unable to say anything as they left. That kind of response only amplified our worries about the future. 6 months have passed since Kevin and Sophie got married, and we haven't seen them once since that initial introduction. We're worried, but as long as our son and his wife are happy, that's all that should matter, or so we tried to tell ourselves. Then Kevin began contacting us occasionally. At first, it should have been a joy to hear from him, but the content of his calls was concerning. "Hey, I'm a bit short on cash. Can you send me $1,000? I'll send you the account details later." It was always about money. He never showed any concern for us, just one-way demands, and it wasn't just once, it was several times a month. We knew this wasn't good. We wanted Kevin to stand on his own, but our concern for our only son made us give in. After discussing it, we complied with his requests. I wish he'd be smarter with his money, I'd say. The early days of marriage are expensive, and we hardly did anything for him when he was young. "This is partly our responsibility," my husband would add. For a while, we continued to provide funds to Kevin, but recently he started calling almost daily, asking for more money. We realized that if this continued, we wouldn't be able to sustain our own lives. One day, I decided it was time to tell Kevin we couldn't provide any more assistance. When he called, I said, "Kevin, I have something to discuss about money." "What? You're calling to say you'll transfer money?" he asked, sounding disinterested. "No, that's not it. We can't send any more money. We have our own lives to live." "Fine, whatever," he responded, surprisingly calm. I thought we had finally reached an understanding, but my relief was short-lived. Barely an hour after we ended the call, Kevin stormed into our house, furious. "My life is a mess because of you too. It's your fault I dropped out of middle school. It's the parents' responsibility, right? If you can't give me money, then whatever happens is on you." Kevin stood before us, the very image of a delinquent. It's true that my husband and I were too busy with work when he was young and didn't spend enough time with him. Now, seeing him like this, I feared what might happen if we didn't help him. His angry gaze left me with little choice but to comply. "All right, how much do you need?" I asked hesitantly. "That's up to you," Kevin replied, his tone cold. It pained me to realize just how much our son resented us. For the time being, I handed him the $100 I had in my wallet. $100? You're joking, right? He scoffed. "No, this is really all I can do," I said, showing him my bank statement. It was the account we used for living expenses, not the one for savings, so it didn't have much in it. Moreover, it was just before my pension was due, so there was hardly anything left. "Is that so?" Kevin muttered as he pocketed the $100 and left without another word. After that incident, perhaps realizing he couldn't expect any more money from us, the calls from Kevin demanding money stopped. I thought we could finally live a peaceful retirement, until my husband was diagnosed with colorectal cancer shortly afterward. The doctor said that even with treatment, recovery wasn't expected, and only hospice care could be provided. I wanted him to live as long as possible, but he didn't feel the same. "I've had enough," he said, his voice weary. "If there's no hope of recovery, don't waste money. Think of your future and save what we have." Persuaded by my husband's wishes, I reluctantly agreed. I decided to let him spend his final days as he wished. A month later, he passed away peacefully. You did well. This is for the best, I reassured myself, though losing my beloved husband left me in deep sorrow. The only comfort I had was knowing he spent his last moments without pain. Preparations for the funeral began immediately, but my role was minimal, just contacting people from a list my husband had prepared before his passing. The list included old friends, colleagues, and our son Kevin. When I informed Kevin of his father's death, his response was indifferent. How cold-hearted, I thought, letting out a sigh. On the day of the funeral, the service went smoothly and many came to offer their condolences. But there was no sign of my son or his wife. I hadn't expected them to show up, but as I was greeting mourners, I saw Kevin and Sophie arrive, just casually in what looked like loungewear. Unbelievable. I tried to ignore them, but they approached me. So, the old man finally kicked the bucket, huh? You should just go into a care home starting tomorrow, were the first words out of Kevin's mouth. My anger surged at his smirking face and the callous suggestion. Just as I was about to retort, Sophie chimed in. Don't worry, we'll properly inherit the estate and the house. What on earth were they thinking? There's no inheritance for you to receive, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. They had barely been in our lives, yet here they were, acting as if they had a right to everything. I wanted to lash out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it at my husband's funeral. We'll talk later. For now, just offer your incense, I said quietly, trying to suppress the trembling in my voice. Then, I heard a familiar voice. Same as always, said Mr. Smith, an old friend of my husband's and as it turned out, a lawyer. He might know something about this inheritance issue. When I briefly explained the situation to him, he assured me he would help me disinherit Kevin. After the ceremony ended and the mourners had left, only Mr. Smith, my son, his wife, and I remained at the funeral parlor. Did Dad leave a $2 million inheritance? Give it to us, quickly, Kevin demanded, smirking as usual while Sophie looked on expectantly. They must have thought they were entitled to everything, but I had no intention of giving them a cent. I'll make this clear, you won't be getting any inheritance, I stated firmly. Kevin, stunned by my words, reacted with anger. What? You've got to be joking. That's impossible, you can't do that. You think it's not allowed, I replied calmly. Why don't we confirm with Mr. Smith here? I've already left the inheritance matters in his hands, so it's out of mine. Kevin scoffed dismissively. What are you even saying? I don't care about some irrelevant old man. His vulgar language made me feel a deep shame, regretting that I had raised a son who would argue about inheritance at his father's funeral. Disgusted by his attitude, I turned to Mr. Smith and asked, please explain the situation. Of course, Mr. Smith began. Kevin, do you remember me? I don't know you. Who the hell are you? Kevin snapped, his tone aggressive. Mr. Smith remained calm and undisturbed. That's a shame. We used to play together when you were little. Kevin, uninterested in past memories, demanded, so what? You're here to talk about Dad's estate, right? I'm the one who'll inherit it. When Kevin returned to the topic of inheritance, Mr. Smith's expression sharpened. Kevin, you have no right to inherit. What? What nonsense are you spouting? Kevin shot back. Remember your delinquent behavior as a teenager that involved the police, Mr. Smith continued. And as an adult, you accumulated significant debt without your mother's knowledge, which your father had to repay. I know everything. I had just learned these details from Mr. Smith, aware of Kevin's past misdeeds, but completely blindsided by the massive debt he had created, which my husband had quietly covered. So what? Kevin spat. It's a parent's duty to take care of their child. Besides, there's no doubt I'm his son, so naturally, I have a right to the inheritance. Kevin moved toward Mr. Smith in a rage, with Sophie equally furious by his side. It's impossible that Kevin doesn't have any inheritance rights. Everyone knows a person's own child would have rights. Are you a real lawyer, or is that just a lie? She demanded. Their loud arguments drew the attention of the funeral parlor's security guards, who rushed over in a panic. Is there a problem here? One of the guards asked, trying to calm them down as he approached me for details. I felt embarrassed to have others involved in this family conflict. I'm sorry, it's just a family dispute. I apologized sincerely to the guard. We truly didn't mean to cause any trouble. While I bowed my head in apology, Kevin and Sophie continued to struggle. Let go. What do you think you're doing? Ouch, that hurts. "Stop it, old man," they shouted, their disrespectful behavior finally pushing me to the brink. "Enough," I snapped. "Your attire and behavior are completely inappropriate for a funeral. You're causing a scene and disturbing everyone around you. Knock it off." I was aware my voice was getting louder, and the couple, who hadn't expected me to get this angry, suddenly quieted down. Mr. Smith leaned in and whispered to me, "Don't worry, there's no way Kevin will inherit. Your father prepared a contingency plan." "A contingency plan?" I repeated, unsure of what he meant. But Mr. Smith continued, "It's time to confront Kevin with the hardship he's caused you." He patted my back reassuringly. I couldn't indulge my son's selfishness any longer and approached them calmly. "Enough already," I said firmly. "That's my line," Kevin retorted. "All this could end if you just agree to let me inherit." "I've told you countless times, it's impossible for you to inherit," I replied, moving closer with each step. Kevin's face turned pale as he noticed my approach. "You come to your father's funeral with a disrespectful attitude after causing trouble for others your entire life. You truly have no respect for your parents," I said coldly, glaring at him. "No, but that's because of you too. You were never home when I was a kid," Kevin protested, always quick to make excuses when cornered. "Yes, we weren't home, and I regret that," I admitted. "But many kids grow up in similar situations and don't spend their lives blaming their parents. It's pathetic to rely on your parents even as an adult." Kevin trembled silently, his head bowed. Whether from anger or sorrow, I couldn't tell, but I knew he was listening. It was time to resolve this once and for all. "Mr. Smith, please use the last resort you mentioned earlier." I had no idea what this last resort entailed, but it seemed like the only way to break through the current situation. In response, Mr. Smith handed me an envelope. Inside was a document titled Final Judgment Certificate of Inheritance. "What's this?" I asked, perplexed by the contents. I stared at the document in my hands, confused. "What does this mean?" I asked, both Kevin and Sophie looking on with curiosity. Kevin, cornered and defiant, shifted uneasily. Mr. Smith began to explain quietly, "During his lifetime, your father filed a court petition stating that he did not want Kevin to inherit any of his estate. This document proves that his petition was accepted." Kevin and Sophie were clearly shaken by this revelation, and I was struggling to grasp the situation. "When did this happen?" I asked, bewildered. "Your father asked me to keep it a secret from you," Mr. Smith continued. "Now that he has passed away, I believed it was the right time to present this document to you." "What does this mean?" Kevin demanded, his voice tinged with frustration. "Are you saying my father decided to cut me out of the inheritance? Why would he do that? Can this just be ignored?" Mr. Smith explained further, "Normally, a husband's estate would be inherited by his spouse and children. However, under certain circumstances, one can apply to disinherit a specific person. This is known as disinheritance." "So you're telling me my father took this step to exclude me?" Kevin's anger was palpable. "Is there any way this can be ignored?" I had never heard of such a measure before. The reality that my husband had gone to great lengths to ensure Kevin wouldn't inherit was sinking in. Mr. Smith added, "Unfortunately, it cannot be ignored. It has been legally recognized by the court and the procedure is legally valid. Additionally, considering the significant debt Kevin has caused your father over the years, it's understandable why he would want to avoid leaving an inheritance." I had not been aware of the extent of Kevin's debt. How much debt did my son leave for my husband to cover? "It was $40,000, Mr. Smith replied. "Your husband was prepared to handle it himself rather than have Kevin demand money from him every month. There was an agreement that Kevin would repay it, but he broke that promise, which left your husband very angry." I was shocked by this revelation and turned to Kevin, who remained silent. His silence spoke volumes. "If you're going to be silent, then fine. Just leave," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. "I never want to see either of you again," I said firmly. "You understand that you won't be inheriting anything." Kevin's defiant attitude persisted. "But surely there's something." My patience snapped. "Leave, you ungrateful son. Our ties are severed. Never come to see me again." Startled by my outburst, Kevin and Sophie quickly exited the room. I saw Kevin stumble in his haste and fall to the floor. "Mr. Smith, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without your help," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "It was your husband's last wish," Mr. Smith replied. "Now you can find peace knowing his wishes were honored." Thanks to Mr. Smith's support, I was able to protect my late husband's inheritance. Without his assistance, I might have been forced into a difficult situation, vulnerable to Kevin and Sophie's demands. Kevin had never changed, and I no longer considered him my son. He and his wife could fend for themselves. I planned to ensure they received nothing from me. With these thoughts, I left the funeral. A week later, while sorting through my husband's belongings, the phone rang. "Hello, is this Miss Holly?" The voice on the other end was from the police. "Yes, it is. How can I help you?" "We have a son named Kevin, correct? We found 2 children living in a flat under his name, and they've been taken into protective custody." I was stunned. "What's the situation? Are these children my sons?" The officer continued, "We're also searching for Kevin but haven't located him yet. Could you please come to the station?" "I'll be right there," I replied, feeling a mix of dread and curiosity. Upon arriving at the station, I immediately recognized the children. They were about 2 years old and bore a striking resemblance to Kevin when he was young. No birth certificates had been filed, likely due to financial troubles. The landlord had reported them after discovering debt collection letters scattered near the children. They had probably been abandoned during a desperate escape. It was heartbreaking to see such young children in this situation. "Would you consider placing them in a care facility?" the officer asked. "No, I'll take them in," I responded immediately. Since then, I've faced the challenges of childcare, but my days have been fulfilling with the children. Years have passed since I took them in, and there's been no word from Kevin and his wife. I tell the children that their father might be gone or somewhere else, but they won't see him again. The abandonment must have left a deep wound in their hearts, but I am committed to supporting and caring for them as they grow.